Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been hauling freight across the western states for the better part of 11 years now. And in all that time, I've learned that the desert has a way of playing tricks on your mind. The heat does it during the day, shimmering off the asphalt in waves that make you think you're seeing water, where there's only more road stretching into nothing. At night, though, it's different. At night, the desert doesn't trick you with mirages or false promises of relief from the heat. At night, the desert shows you things that shouldn't be there at all. My name is Gideon Rexford, and I drive an 18-wheeler for a mid-sized logistics company out of Reno. Most of my routes take me through Nevada, which means I spend a lot of time on some of the loneliest stretches of highway in the continental United States. Highway 50, the one they call the loneliest road in America, is practically my second home. I've driven it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded, which is why what happened to me 3 months ago shook me so badly. When you know a road that well, when you've traveled it in every season and at every hour, you notice when something's wrong. You notice when something appears that has no business being there. It was a Tuesday night in late January when I started my run from Reno to Ely, hauling a load of construction equipment that needed to be there by morning. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, and for once, the forecast was right. No clouds, no wind, just that vast Nevada darkness pressing down from above like a physical weight. The temperature had dropped to somewhere in the low 20s, cold enough that I could see my breath when I did my pre-trip inspection, checking the tires and making sure all the straps were secure on my flatbed. Everything looked good, so I climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and pulled out of the depot around 9:30 p.m. The first hour was completely routine. I merged onto Highway 50 eastbound and settled into that familiar rhythm that all long-haul drivers know, where the road becomes almost meditative and your mind sort of floats while your hands and feet do all the work. The radio was playing some old country station out of Carson City, and I had my thermos of coffee wedged into the cup holder, still steaming hot. Every now and then I'd see the taillights of another vehicle far ahead, or headlights approaching from the opposite direction, but for the most part, I had the road to myself. That's normal for Highway 50, especially on a Tuesday night in winter. Most people don't have any reason to be out here, and the ones who do are usually trying to get where they're going as fast as possible. Around mile marker 47, just past the turnoff for Silver Springs, I noticed my fuel gauge was sitting at about a quarter tank. I hadn't planned to stop until I got to Fallon, which had a truck stop I'd used dozens of times before. But I was making good time, and the night was so clear and calm that I decided to push through to Austin instead. It would mean a longer stretch between fuel stops, but Austin had cheaper diesel, and every penny counts when you're an owner-operator leasing to a company. The decision was purely practical, the kind of minor calculation that drivers make 100 times on every run. I had no way of knowing that this particular decision would change everything. By the time I passed through Fallon, it was almost 11 p.m. The town was mostly dark, just a few streetlights marking the main intersection and the glow of a couple of gas stations that stayed open late for people passing through. I didn't stop, just kept the hammer down and continued east. The road beyond Fallon is where Highway 50 really earns its reputation for loneliness. There's nothing out there but sagebrush and sand, with mountains rising in the distance like dark teeth against the slightly less dark sky. No towns, no houses, no lights of any kind except for your own headlights cutting through the blackness ahead. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes past Fallon when I first noticed the lights behind me. They appeared suddenly in my mirrors, 3 sets of headlights maybe half a mile back, moving at roughly the same speed I was. At first, I didn't think much of it. Truckers often end up traveling in loose convoys like that, not planned or organized, just the natural result of vehicles leaving around the same time and maintaining similar speeds. It's actually kind of comforting sometimes, knowing there are other drivers out there in the dark with you, even if you never speak to them or learn their names. We're all just trying to make a living, moving goods from one place to another through the long, cold nights. But something about these lights bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was at first. They maintained a perfectly consistent distance behind me, never getting closer, never falling back. When I sped up slightly, they sped up. When I slowed down to test it, they slowed down too. The spacing between the three sets of lights never changed either, like they were locked together somehow. I watched them in my mirrors for a good 10 minutes, trying to decide if I was just being paranoid or if there was actually something strange going on. Then I realized what was bothering me. The lights were old. Not the trucks themselves, but the headlights. Modern semi-trucks have bright white LED or HID headlights that light up the road like daylight. These lights behind me were the yellowish color of old, sealed beam headlights, the kind of lights that haven't been standard equipment on trucks for probably 30 years. They had that dim, slightly orange quality that I remembered from when I was a kid, riding with my dad in his Peterbilt back in the early 90s. Seeing lights like that on a modern highway was like seeing someone driving a Model T on the interstate. Technically possible, but so unusual that it demanded explanation. I grabbed my CB radio and keyed the mic. "Breaker, breaker. This is Rexford hauling eastbound on Highway 50 at marker 68. Got 3 trucks running behind me. Wondering if you guys are monitoring this channel." I waited, listening to the static, then tried again. "This is Rexford to the 3 trucks behind me on 50 eastbound. You guys got your ears on?" Nothing but static. Either they weren't running CBs, which would be strange for trucks that old, or they weren't interested in talking. Or maybe, a small voice in the back of my mind suggested, there was another reason they weren't answering. I told myself I was being ridiculous. They were just old trucks, probably owned by some small outfit that couldn't afford newer equipment, running late-night hauls when there was less traffic to slow them down. The drivers were probably listening to music or podcasts instead of monitoring the CB, which was increasingly common these days. There was no reason to feel uneasy about it. But I did feel uneasy, and the feeling was getting stronger with each passing mile. At mile marker 78, I decided to pull off at the next turnout and let them pass. It wasn't a rest stop or anything, just a wide spot in the road where the highway department had paved a little extra asphalt for emergency stops. I put on my turn signal, though there was no one else around to see it, and eased my rig onto the shoulder. The air brakes hissed as I came to a complete stop, and I shifted into neutral, letting the engine idle. Then I watched my mirrors, waiting for the 3 sets of headlights to pass by. They didn't pass. Instead, they slowed down and pulled off the road about 200 yards behind me, stopping in a line. I could see them clearly now in my mirrors, 3 shapes darker than the surrounding darkness, their yellow headlights pointed straight at me. They just sat there, idling, making no move to pass or pull up closer. The distance between us remained constant, like there was some invisible barrier they couldn't or wouldn't cross. My heart was starting to beat faster now, a sick feeling building in my stomach. This wasn't normal trucker behavior. If they needed help, they would have used the CB or pulled up next to me. If they were just taking a break at the same time I was, they would have spaced themselves out or at least cut their headlights. But they just sat there in formation, watching me. I thought about getting out and walking back to ask if everything was okay, but something stopped me. Some instinct older than logic told me that walking back there in the dark would be a mistake I wouldn't get to regret. I put the truck back in gear and pulled onto the highway, accelerating harder than I normally would. In my mirrors, I watched the 3 trucks pull back onto the road behind me, maintaining that same 200-yard distance. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, and I realized my breath was coming faster. I tried the CB again, cycling through all the channels, but there was nothing except static and the occasional distant voice from some trucker 50 miles away. Whatever was behind me, they weren't talking. For the next 45 minutes, we continued like that. Me driving east through the Nevada darkness, them following at that exact same distance, never varying, never closing, never falling back. I tried speeding up to 75, then 80, pushing my truck harder than I should have been pushing it with the load I was carrying. They kept pace effortlessly. I tried slowing down to 50, then 45. They slowed down too. It was like we were connected by some invisible tow rope, or like they were shadows being cast by my own headlights, except that made no sense because they were behind me. Around 1 in the morning, I passed the town of Sand Mountain, which isn't really a town at all, just a name on the map marking a spot where there used to be a gas station that closed sometime in the 1980s. I knew Austin was still about 40 miles ahead, and I was starting to seriously consider whether I should just pull off and wait for daylight, let whatever was behind me pass or disappear or reveal itself to be nothing more than a normal convoy of old trucks. But the thought of sitting on the side of the road with those lights behind me in the dark made my skin crawl. At least while I was moving, I felt like I had some control over the situation. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lights behind me weren't reflecting off the ground. I could see the beams of my own headlights clearly, illuminating the asphalt and the white edge lines and the sagebrush on either side of the road. But the lights behind me, those old yellow headlights from 3 separate trucks, they weren't creating any visible beams. They were just there. 3 pairs of glowing circles in my mirrors, not lighting up anything around them. It was like looking at lights that existed only in 2 dimensions, painted onto the darkness rather than shining through it. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes with one hand while steering with the other, thinking maybe it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the effect was the same. Those lights weren't behaving like lights should behave. They weren't following the normal rules of physics, of cause and effect. And that's when I started to seriously question whether what I was seeing was real at all, or whether I was experiencing some kind of hallucination brought on by carbon monoxide or exhaustion or something I'd eaten that didn't agree with me. But the lights stayed there in my mirrors, solid and consistent and utterly impossible. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd call my friend Thorne Kessler, who ran a truck repair shop in Reno. Thorne had been driving trucks for 25 years before he hung up his keys and opened the shop, and he'd heard every kind of weird road story there was. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be him. But when I looked at my phone, I saw I had no signal, not even 1 bar. That wasn't unusual on Highway 50, but the timing felt ominous. I was approaching mile marker 120 now, getting close to the junction with Highway 722, which branched off to the north toward Battle Mountain. I made a split-second decision. I'd take 722 and see if the lights followed me off Highway 50. If they did, then I'd know for certain that this wasn't random, that whatever was happening was specifically about me. If they didn't, if they just continued east on 50, then maybe I could convince myself it had all been a coincidence, just some strange atmospheric phenomenon or trick of the light. The turnoff came up fast, and I jerked the wheel harder than I should have, feeling the load shift slightly behind me as I took the turn. My tires squealed a little, and I heard one of the straps on the flatbed creak in protest, but everything held. I straightened out onto Highway 722 and immediately looked in my mirrors to see what the lights would do. They followed me. All 3 of them took the turn in perfect formation, maintaining that same impossible distance. And now that we were on a different road, one that I hadn't planned to take and had only decided on at the last second, I knew this couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever those lights were, whatever was creating them, it was following me specifically. It wanted something from me, or wanted to show me something, or was herding me towards some destination I couldn't yet see. Highway 722 runs north through even more desolate country than Highway 50, if that's possible. This was mining territory once, back in the silver boom days, but now there's nothing out here except the ghosts of abandoned claims and the occasional coyote. The road is narrower than 50, more winding, with steep drop-offs on one side and rocky cliffs on the other. Not a good place to be if something went wrong with your truck. Not a good place to be at all, especially at 1:30 in the morning with 3 impossible lights following behind you in the darkness. I kept driving because there was nothing else to do. Stopping seemed like an even worse idea now that we were on this secondary road where no one else would be coming along. At least, on Highway 50, there was a chance that another truck or a state trooper might pass by. Out here, we might as well have been on the far side of the moon. Around mile marker 12 on Highway 722, I noticed something new. The temperature gauge on my dashboard was starting to climb. Not fast, but steadily, the needle moving from its normal position in the middle toward the higher numbers that meant trouble. I checked my mirrors to see if I could spot any steam coming from the radiator, but I couldn't see anything except those 3 sets of yellow lights. The engine sounded fine, no knocking or missing, but that gauge kept climbing. Then the oil pressure started to drop. First a little, then more, the needle sinking toward the red zone while my heart sank with it. I knew what this meant. Something was seriously wrong with my engine, and if I didn't stop soon, I'd be looking at catastrophic failure. But stopping meant being alone with whatever was behind me, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. The decision was made for me when the engine started to knock, a deep, rhythmic, hammering sound that every trucker knows and dreads. I was losing oil pressure fast, probably from a blown seal or a cracked line, and if I kept driving, I'd seize the engine completely. I had no choice. I had to pull over. I spotted a wider section of shoulder ahead and eased the truck onto it, feeling sick to my stomach. The air brakes hissed. The engine shuddered and died, and suddenly I was sitting in complete silence except for the ticking of cooling metal. I looked in my mirrors, expecting to see the 3 trucks pull up behind me, but they were gone. The road behind me was completely empty. Just darkness and the faint outline of mountains against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. There were no lights, no sounds, nothing to indicate that anyone had been following me at all. I sat there for a long moment, trying to process what I was seeing, or what I wasn't seeing. Had they turned off somewhere? Had I imagined the whole thing? I replayed the last few hours in my mind, trying to find the moment when reality had started to slip, but I couldn't. The lights had been there. I'd seen them. I'd watched them follow me for nearly 2 hours, through every turn and speed change, and a knock on my passenger side window made me jump so hard I hit my head on the roof of the cab. I spun to look, my hand instinctively reaching for the tire iron I kept under the seat, but what I saw stopped me cold. There was a woman standing outside my truck, illuminated by my cab lights. She was wearing a dispatch uniform, the kind that small trucking companies used back in the day, with a name tag that read May. She looked solid and real, not translucent or ghostly, and she was gesturing for me to roll down the window. Her face was friendly, concerned, like she'd just stopped to help a stranded driver. I cracked the window an inch, keeping the tire iron in my other hand. "You okay, driver?" she called out. Her voice was clear and normal, with a slight Western accent. "Saw your lights from the road. Engine trouble?" "Yeah," I managed to say, my voice coming out rough. Lost oil pressure. You from around here? She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. You could say that. Been working these roads a long time. Listen, you're gonna want to leave this truck here and walk back to Highway 50. There's a rest stop about 8 miles west. You can call for a tow from there. 8 miles is a long walk, I said, watching her carefully. Something about this situation felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what it was. She looked real, she sounded real, but every instinct I had was screaming that I shouldn't trust her. Better a long walk than staying here, she said, and now her smile faded completely. This road isn't safe at night. Haven't you noticed? Haven't you seen what's been following you? My grip tightened on the tire iron. What do you know about that? Everything, she said simply. I know because I was one of them once. Back in 1907, there was a convoy, 3 trucks running freight from Reno to Battle Mountain. We never made it. Something happened on this road. Something that shouldn't have happened. And now we're stuck here. We drive the same route every night, over and over, and sometimes we see other trucks and we follow them, trying to remember what it was like to be real. I stared at her, my mind refusing to process what she was saying. That's insane. You're saying you're a ghost? I'm saying you need to leave, she said, and there was an urgency in her voice now. Your engine didn't break down on its own. We did that, trying to make you stop, trying to make you see us. But now that you're stopped, the others are coming, and they're not as friendly as I am. They don't remember being human anymore. They just remember the road and the crash, and they want someone to share it with them. As if on cue, I heard the sound of engines in the distance, growing closer. I looked past May and saw them coming up the road, 3 sets of yellow headlights. But now they were moving faster, closing the distance that they'd maintained so carefully before, and I could see the shapes of the trucks themselves, old Peterbilts and Kenworths from the 80s, their chrome dull and their paint faded. Go, May said, stepping back from my truck. Get out and run. Don't look back, don't stop, just run until you hit Highway 50. Do it now. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my jacket and my phone, threw open the driver's door, and jumped down to the asphalt. The cold hit me immediately, that brutal Nevada desert cold that drops to near freezing once the sun goes down. But I barely felt it. All I could feel was pure animal terror as I started running back the way I'd come, my boots pounding the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the trucks getting closer, their engines roaring like hungry beasts. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. They were right there, maybe 50 yards back, bearing down on me with those awful yellow lights. And I could see the drivers now, or what used to be drivers, slumped over their wheels with their heads at wrong angles, their bodies moving in jerky puppet-like motions as they steered their trucks toward me. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, my lungs burning, my legs pumping, the cold air searing my throat. The road stretched ahead of me into darkness, and I had no idea how far I'd have to go before I reached the junction with Highway 50. 8 miles, May had said. 8 miles might as well have been 800 at the speed I was moving. The sound of the trucks was deafening now, right behind me, and I could feel the heat from their engines and smell diesel fuel and something else, something rotten and wrong. I veered off the road into the sagebrush, stumbling over rocks and dips in the ground, thinking maybe they couldn't follow me off the pavement. But I heard their tires leave the asphalt, heard the scrape of metal on rock as they crashed through the brush after me. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die. Run down by ghost trucks on a forgotten Nevada highway, my body left for the vultures and coyotes, another mystery for some future trucker to wonder about. I thought about my ex-wife, my daughter, who I barely got to see since the divorce, my friend Thorne. I thought about all the things I'd never get to do, never get to say. And then I saw lights ahead. Real lights, white and bright, sweeping across the landscape. Headlights from a vehicle on Highway 50, moving west to east. I changed direction, running toward those lights like they were the gates of heaven itself. Screaming, though I knew no one could hear me over the sound of engines and wind. The sound of the trucks behind me suddenly cut off. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I risked another glance back and saw them sitting there in the brush, maybe 30 yards away. Their yellow lights dim now, their engines silent. They weren't moving anymore. They were just watching as I stumbled the last 100 yards to Highway 50 and collapsed on the shoulder, my chest heaving, my hands scraped and bleeding from falls I didn't remember taking. The vehicle I'd seen turned out to be a state trooper, and he pulled over when he saw me lying there. I must have looked like hell, covered in dust and sweat, wild-eyed and gasping. He called for an ambulance and a tow truck, and while we waited, I told him what happened. Or I tried to. The words came out jumbled and confused, and I could see in his eyes that he thought I was drunk or high or having some kind of breakdown. They towed my truck back to Austin, and the mechanic there found the problem immediately. The oil line had come loose, he said, probably just worked itself free from vibration over time. Simple fix. Could have happened to anyone. The mechanic's name was printed on his coveralls, Thorne Kessler. But it wasn't my Thorne. Wrong age, wrong face, just happened to have the same name. I didn't mention the convoy. Didn't tell him about May or the lights or any of it. I just paid for the repair, got back in my truck, and drove to Ely to deliver my load. I called my friend Thorne, the real one, when I got phone signal. But I didn't tell him what happened either. Some things sound too crazy to share, even with people you trust. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't driven Highway 722 since. I take the long way around now, even though it adds 2 hours to my runs. My dispatcher thinks I'm being ridiculous, but she doesn't push it. May Tolliver is her name. Different May from the one I met, obviously. But when I heard her name the first time after that night, I had to pull over and throw up on the side of the road. I still drive Highway 50 sometimes. I still see lights in my mirrors. But now I know what to do. I don't follow them. I don't stop for them. I keep driving until I hit sunrise, until those old yellow lights fade away in my mirrors like they were never there at all. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my cab, I think about that convoy from 1987. 3 trucks that never made it to Battle Mountain. 3 drivers whose names I'll never know. And I wonder if May is still out there, trying to warn other truckers, trying to make up for whatever happened on that dark Nevada road so many years ago. The next 2 weeks after that night on Highway 722, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd been breathing diesel fumes for too long, or maybe the high-altitude desert air had done something to my brain chemistry. I'd heard stories about truckers who'd been on the road so long they started seeing things that weren't there. Phantom hitchhikers and ghost cars and all manner of impossible things. But those were just stories. Campfire tales that drivers told each other at rest stops to pass the time. They weren't supposed to be real. But I couldn't shake the memory of those yellow lights in my mirrors, or the sound of May Tolliver's voice telling me to run. I couldn't forget the feeling of those trucks bearing down on me through the sagebrush, their engines roaring like they were powered by something other than diesel and steel. Most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about what May had said about the 1987 convoy, about drivers who were stuck repeating the same route night after night, trapped in some kind of loop they couldn't escape from. I started doing research during my downtime, which wasn't something I normally did. Usually when I wasn't driving, I was either sleeping or catching up on bills or trying to maintain some kind of relationship with my daughter through video calls and text messages. But now I found myself in public libraries and truck stop lounges with Wi-Fi, searching through old newspaper archives for any mention of accidents on Highway 722 in 1987. Nevada has a surprising amount of its local history digitized, probably because there's so little of it compared to eastern states, and it didn't take me long to find what I was looking for. The accident had happened on March 14, 1987, according to the Reno Gazette-Journal. 3 trucks hauling mining equipment from Reno to Battle Mountain had gone off Highway 722 in the early morning hours, plunging into a ravine. All 3 drivers were killed instantly. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs in the local news section, and it didn't provide many details. There was no explanation for why all 3 trucks had left the road at the same time. No mention of weather conditions, or mechanical failure, or driver error. The investigation had concluded it was probably black ice, though the article noted that temperatures that night had been above freezing. One of the drivers was listed as May Tolliver, age 28, employed by Silver State Logistics. Her photograph showed a woman who looked exactly like the one I'd seen outside my truck that night, down to the dispatch uniform and the friendly smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The other 2 drivers were Harlan Murdoch and Vernon Pike, both in their 40s, both with families. The article mentioned that Silver State Logistics had closed down 6 months after the accident, unable to recover from the loss of personnel and equipment. I sat in that truck stop lounge, staring at May's photograph for a long time, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I thought I knew about the world. Ghosts weren't real. Dead people didn't warn living truckers about danger on lonely highways. Physics didn't allow for engines that cast no light beams or trucks that could appear and disappear like smoke. But I'd seen it. I'd experienced it. And now I had proof that at least part of what May told me was true. The problem was, I couldn't just avoid Highway 722 forever. My job required flexibility, and sooner or later my dispatcher would route me through that area again. More than that, I found myself thinking about those drivers, about May and Harlan and Vernon, stuck in some kind of eternal replay of their worst moment. May had been trying to help me, trying to warn me away from whatever fate had claimed her and her convoy. But what about the others? What about Harlan and Vernon, who May said didn't remember being human anymore? Were they suffering? Did they know they were dead? Or were they just running on some kind of ghostly autopilot, doomed to chase living truckers through the Nevada darkness until the end of time? I called Thorne Kessler one afternoon when I was parked at a rest stop outside of Carson City. Thorne and I had been friends since I first started driving trucks, back when I was still learning how to double clutch and he was teaching safety classes for new drivers. He'd seen me through my divorce, through the lean years when I couldn't get enough loads to make my truck payments, through every crisis and setback that comes with life on the road. If there was anyone I could talk to about this without being laughed out of the room, it was Thorne. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly from years of breathing diesel smoke and desert dust. "Gideon, what's going on? You don't usually call in the middle of the day." "I need to ask you something," I said, watching a family pile out of an RV at the far end of the rest stop parking lot. "Have you ever heard stories about Highway 722, about trucks that drive it at night?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Thorne said, "What happened?" So I told him. All of it. From the moment I first saw the lights behind me on Highway 50, to my conversation with May, to my desperate run through the sagebrush. I told him about the research I'd done, about the newspaper article and the photographs. I expected him to laugh, or to tell me I needed to take some time off and get my head straight. Instead, he just listened, occasionally making a small sound to show he was still there but never interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew May Tolliver. Not well, but I met her a few times at the Silver State Depot. She was a good driver, safety conscious, always did her pre-trip inspections by the book. I remember when that accident happened, it shook up the whole trucking community in northern Nevada. 3 trucks going off the road at the same time. All experienced drivers, perfect weather conditions. Nobody could make sense of it. Thorne, I saw her. I talked to her. She knew things, specific things about what was happening. "I believe you," he said, and the simple certainty in his voice made something unclench in my chest. "Listen, Gideon, I've been around trucks and truckers for more years than I care to count, and I've heard things that would make your hair stand on end. Drivers who picked up hitchhikers that vanished from locked cabs, trucks that appeared in mirrors and then disappeared when you looked with your eyes. Voices on the CB from dead drivers, giving warnings about accidents that hadn't happened yet. Most people dismiss it as fatigue or imagination, and maybe some of it is, but not all of it. These roads, they remember. The desert remembers. And sometimes the people who died here, they remember too." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "I can't just avoid that whole area forever. That's prime routing territory for my loads." "You do what May told you to do," Thorne said. "You don't stop, you don't engage. If you see those lights again, you keep driving until you hit daylight or you hit a town with people in it. The dead can only reach so far into the world of the living, and they're strongest in the empty places, the dark places. You stay in the light, you stay around people, and you'll be fine. And if I can't, if my truck breaks down again, or if they force me to stop somehow—" Thorne was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then you remember that May helped you once. She's still in there, still human enough to care about living drivers. If it comes down to it, you call out to her. Maybe she'll be able to help again. But Gideon, if you can avoid it, don't go back there. That road took something from those drivers, and it's still hungry." We talked for a few more minutes about other things. Normal things like the price of diesel and whether the raiders would ever get their act together. But his words stayed with me long after we hung up. The dead can only reach so far into the world of the living. The road is still hungry. These weren't the kind of phrases you expected to hear from a practical man like Thorne Kessler, a man who dealt in torque specs and brake pad thickness and oil viscosity ratings. But he'd said them, and he'd meant them, and that scared me more than anything else. I went another week without any incidents, running loads through California and Oregon and Washington. I stayed away from Nevada entirely, taking routes that added hours to my drive time, but kept me far from Highway 50 and its lonelier offshoots. My dispatcher complained about the inefficiency, but I made up excuses about road construction and wait station delays. She didn't push it. As long as I was getting loads delivered on time, she didn't care what route I took. But then came the call I'd been dreading. A high-priority load from Reno to Battle Mountain due to deliver by dawn. Mining equipment again, same as what May and her convoy had been hauling back in 1987. The coincidence wasn't lost on me, and neither was the routing. Highway 50 to Highway 722, the exact same path I'd driven 3 weeks earlier. The exact same path where I'd encountered the Phantom convoy. I thought about turning it down, claiming mechanical problems or a family emergency. But I needed the money. My truck payment was due, my insurance was coming up, and my ex-wife was threatening to take me back to court over child support. More than that, there was a part of me that wanted to go back. Needed to go back. I had questions that only that stretch of road could answer, and avoiding it forever felt like a kind of cowardice I couldn't live with. So I took the load. I did my pre-trip inspection with extra care, checking every belt and hose and fluid level twice. I made sure my phone was fully charged and I had a backup battery pack. I filled my thermos with coffee strong enough to strip paint and loaded up on energy drinks and protein bars. If I was going to drive Highway 722 at night again, I was going to be as prepared as humanly possible. The run started out fine. I left Reno just after sunset, the sky still holding on to that deep blue twilight color that comes right before full darkness. The weather was clear and calm. No wind, temperature in the mid-40s. Perfect driving conditions, if you didn't count the sick feeling of dread building in my stomach with each mile marker I passed. I hit Highway 50 around 8 p.m. and settled into that familiar rhythm, trying to keep my mind on the road and off what might be waiting for me up ahead. The radio was playing classic rock, same station I always listened to, and I sang along under my breath to keep my mind occupied. Just another night, just another run. Nothing special about it at all, but my eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, watching for lights that shouldn't be there. And my hand kept drifting to the CB radio, even though I knew there was no point in calling out. The Dead Don't Answer on Channel 19. I passed through Fallon around 9:30, the town's lights receding quickly in my mirrors as I continued east into the darkness. This was the stretch where I'd first noticed the convoy following me last time, and I felt every muscle in my body tense up in anticipation. But the road behind me stayed empty. No lights, no shapes, nothing but the darkness and my own reflection in the mirrors. Maybe it wouldn't happen again. Maybe that night 3 weeks ago had been a one-time thing, a strange cosmic alignment of circumstances that would never repeat. Maybe May and her convoy were somewhere else tonight, following some other unfortunate driver. Or maybe they'd finally found whatever peace they'd been looking for and had moved on to wherever dead truckers are supposed to go. I almost started to relax as I approached the junction with Highway 722. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. My engine temperature was normal. My oil pressure was right where it should be. Everything was fine. Everything was going to be fine. I'd take 722 up to Battle Mountain, deliver my load, and be back on safer roads by sunrise. Simple as that. That's when I saw her standing on the side of the road. May Tolliver was exactly where she'd been before, maybe 100 yards past the junction, standing in the gravel shoulder with her hand raised like she was trying to flag me down. She looked solid and real in my headlights casting a shadow, her dispatch uniform catching the light. But I knew what she was now. I knew she'd been dead for 37 years, that her body was buried in some cemetery in Reno, that what I was seeing was something that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught about how the world worked. I slowed down as I approached her, my heart hammering in my chest. Thorne's advice echoed in my head, don't stop, don't engage, keep driving until you hit daylight. But May had helped me before. She'd warned me, given me a chance to escape. I owed her something for that, even if I wasn't sure what. I brought the truck to a stop about 20 feet from where she stood, leaving the engine running and my foot on the brake. I rolled down the window and leaned out, the cold night air hitting my face. "May," I called out. "What are you doing here?" She walked toward the truck, and I noticed that her feet made no sound on the gravel. When she got close enough, I could see that her face looked strained, worried in a way it hadn't been before. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "You need to turn around right now and take Highway 50 all the way around. Don't argue, just do it. What's wrong? What's different from last time?" She glanced over her shoulder at the dark road stretching north, then looked back at me. "The others know you now. They remember you from before, and they're angry that you got away. They've been waiting, hoping you'd come back. If you go up that road tonight, they won't stop until they catch you. And this time, I don't think I'll be able to help." "Who were they?" I asked. "Harlan and Vernon, your convoy mates. What happened to them?" May's face twisted with something that might have been pain or grief or guilt. "We were running behind schedule that night. The mine needed the equipment by morning, and we'd lost time to a breakdown in Reno, so we pushed harder than we should have, drove faster than was safe on these back roads. I was in the lead, Harlan was in the middle, Vernon was bringing up the rear. We'd done it 100 times before. She paused, and I could see her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. I saw the lights first, just like you did, except they were ahead of me instead of behind. Old lights, yellow lights, coming straight at me on my side of the road. I tried to swerve, but there was nowhere to go. The drop-off was right there. And then Harlan and Vernon, they followed me right over the edge because they trusted me, because I was the lead driver and they thought I knew what I was doing. It wasn't your fault, I said. You didn't know. That's what they told me at first, the other dead people on this road. There are more of us than you'd think, Gideon. This desert has claimed a lot of truckers over the years. They said it was the road itself that killed us, that the lights were just the road's way of hunting. But Harlan and Vernon, they didn't see it that way. They blamed me. They still blame me. And over the years, they've changed. They've become part of the road now, part of the thing that hunts. And they want you because you remind them of what they used to be, because you're alive and they're not. I sat there processing this, trying to make sense of it. So what are you saying? That this road is alive somehow? That it kills people on purpose? I'm saying there are places in this world where the boundary between life and death gets thin, May said. Places where the desert is so empty and so quiet that the dead can push through. Highway 722 is one of those places. Always has been, long before they paved it. The Shoshone wouldn't travel through here at night, did you know that? They had stories about spirits that wandered these hills, looking for people to join them in death. We just thought they were superstitions. She stepped closer to my truck, and I could see now that she wasn't quite solid, that the starlight was passing through her in a way that it shouldn't. Turn around, Gideon, please. I don't want another death on my conscience. I've been trying to warn drivers away from this road for decades, but most of them don't see me, don't hear me. You're different somehow. Maybe because you saw us following you that first night. Maybe because you're open to the possibility. But that makes you vulnerable too. The road knows you now. Harlan and Vernon know you, and they're patient. They can wait. I looked at the dark road ahead, then at my load securely strapped to my flatbed. I thought about the mine waiting for this equipment, about my bills waiting to be paid, about my daughter who deserved a father who kept his commitments. Then I thought about May's warning, about Thorne's words, about the very real possibility that if I continued up Highway 722 tonight, I might not make it to Battle Mountain at all. I appreciate the warning, I said finally, but I've got a job to do. I'll be careful, I'll keep my speed up, and I won't stop for anything, but I can't turn around. May looked at me for a long moment, her expression sad. Then at least let me ride with you. If Harlan and Vernon come, maybe I can slow them down, buy you enough time to get clear. I can't promise it'll work, but it's better than facing them alone. The thought of driving with a ghost in my passenger seat should have terrified me, but somehow it didn't. May had been trying to help me from the start, and even in death, she was still acting like the safety-conscious driver Thorne had described. "All right," I said, "get in." She walked around the front of the truck and I watched her in the headlights. She moved like a living person, with weight and presence, but there was something slightly off about it, like watching a video with a frame rate that didn't quite match reality. When she opened the passenger door and climbed in, I didn't feel the truck shift the way it normally did when someone got in. But she sat down in the seat, pulled the door closed, and looked at me with those worried eyes that held 3 decades of death in them. "Drive fast," she said. "Don't look in the mirrors unless I tell you to. And whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't stop. Promise me that." "I promise," I said. and put the truck in gear. We pulled back onto Highway 722, the darkness swallowing us whole. And somewhere behind us, in the empty desert night, I heard the sound of engines starting up. The sound of those engines behind us wasn't like normal diesel engines. There was something wrong with the pitch, something that made my teeth ache and my hands grip the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. It was too deep, resonating in a frequency that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. And underneath that deep rumble, there was another sound, something that might have been voices, or might have been wind, or might have been the road itself screaming. I pushed the accelerator down harder, watching the speedometer climb past 65, then 70. My truck wasn't built for speed, not with the full load of mining equipment strapped to the flatbed, but I coaxed every bit of velocity I could out of her. The engine roared in protest, the transmission whining as I held it in a lower gear than I should have to maintain torque. Every trucker instinct I had was telling me this was dangerous, that I was risking a rollover or a jackknife or a dozen other catastrophic failures. But May sat beside me in the passenger seat, her ghostly hands clenched in her lap, and the look on her face told me that mechanical failure was the least of my worries right now. "How far back are they?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating nothing but asphalt and the occasional scrub brush at the shoulder. May twisted in her seat to look behind us, and I saw her transparent form flicker slightly, like a television picture losing signal. "Maybe half a mile. They're gaining, but not as fast as they could be. I think they're toying with us, trying to make the fear last longer. That's what they do now. It's all they have left." "Tell me about them," I said, partly because I wanted to understand what we were dealing with, and partly because talking helped keep the panic at bay. "Harlan and Vernon, what were they like before?" May was quiet for a moment, her eyes still fixed on whatever she could see behind us that I couldn't. "Harlan Murdoch was from Winnemucca originally, married, 3 kids, been driving trucks since he got out of high school. He was the kind of guy who always had a joke ready, always tried to keep spirits up on long hauls. We'd run convoys together maybe a dozen times before that night, and every single time he'd have us laughing about something. His wife used to pack him these elaborate lunches, sandwiches cut into shapes, little notes written on the napkins. He'd show them to us at rest stops, grinning like a kid." She paused, and I could hear the pain in her voice even though she'd been dead for 37 years. Vernon Pike was different, quieter, more serious. He was from Battle Mountain, had worked in the mines before he started driving. He knew those roads better than anyone, every curve and grade and rough patch. He used to say that Highway 722 had a personality, that you had to respect it or it would bite you. I thought he was just being superstitious. Turns out he was right. "What happened to them after the crash? How did they become what they are now?" May turned back to face forward, her expression haunted. "At first, we were all the same, confused, scared, not understanding why we couldn't leave this stretch of road. We'd try to walk away, but we'd always end up back at the crash site. We'd flag down other drivers, but most of them couldn't see us or wouldn't stop. The ones who did stop, they couldn't help. What were they going to do? We were already dead." She looked down at her hands, which were starting to fade at the edges, becoming more translucent. Over time, Harlan and Vernon changed. They got angry about what happened, angry at me for leading them over that edge, angry at the road for taking us, angry at every living driver who got to keep going while we were stuck. The anger consumed them bit by bit until there was nothing else left. They forgot their families, forgot their names, forgot everything except the crash and the road and the hunting. Now they're just rage and darkness wearing the shape of trucks. I glanced at the speedometer. 75 miles per hour with a full load on a 2-lane highway with no shoulder. This was insane. But the alternative was stopping. And I'd seen what happened to people who stopped on Highway 722 after dark. "There," May said suddenly, pointing ahead to where the road curved slightly to the left around a rocky outcropping. "When you hit that curve, you need to accelerate through it, not brake. They'll expect you to slow down. If you speed up instead, you might gain some distance." "That's not safe," I said automatically, my training overriding my fear for a moment. "I could lose the load, or worse." "You'll lose more than the load if they catch us," May said flatly. "Trust me, Gideon. I've been running from them for 37 years. I know how they think." I did what she said. When the curve came up, I pressed the accelerator instead of the brake, feeling the truck lean as the weight shifted, hearing the straps on the flatbed creak in protest. For a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, that the whole rig was going to tip over and send us tumbling into the same ravine that had claimed May and her convoy all those years ago. But the tires held, the suspension groaned but didn't break, and we came out of the curve doing 80 miles an hour with my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. Behind us, I heard an angry roar that definitely wasn't coming from any normal engine. May's face went pale, if it was possible for a ghost to go paler than they already were. "They're not happy about that," she said. "They're going to come harder now." "How much farther to Battle Mountain?" I asked, trying to remember the mile markers from my previous runs on this route. "About 40 miles, but there's a problem." May pointed ahead to where the road stretched into darkness. Around mile marker 34, there's a section where the road was washed out in a flash flood back in 2019. They fixed it, but they had to reroute the highway through a temporary detour that goes right past the old crash site. If we go through there, Harlan and Vernon will be at their strongest. The place where they died, it's like a battery for them. They can do things there that they can't do anywhere else. "What kind of things?" "Make the road disappear. Make your truck stall. Make you see things that will drive you off the edge, just like they drove us." I've watched it happen to other drivers, Gideon. Not many, but enough. The ones who stop, who get out of their trucks, who try to investigate. The road takes them, and then they're stuck here too. More ghosts for the collection. I thought about this for a moment, doing calculations in my head. If we were 40 miles from Battle Mountain and the detour was at mile marker 34, that gave me maybe 15 minutes before we hit the danger zone. 15 minutes to come up with some kind of plan. Though, what kind of plan could possibly work against vengeful ghosts and a highway that apparently had a taste for truckers, I had no idea. "Is there another route?" I asked. "Any way to avoid the detour?" May shook her head. "The old road is completely impassable. They never bothered to fix it because hardly anyone uses Highway 722 anymore. Most freight goes up Highway 80 or stays on Highway 50 all the way around. This road is dying, and that makes it even more dangerous. The fewer living people who travel it, the stronger the dead become." The sound of engines behind us was getting louder again despite our increased speed. I risked a glance in my side mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The 3 sets of yellow headlights were closer now, maybe a quarter-mile back, and in the dim glow I could see the shapes of the trucks themselves. They were old Peterbilts, just like May had said, probably from the mid-'80s. But there was something wrong with their proportions, like they'd been stretched and twisted somehow. Their grills looked too wide, their windshields too dark, their chrome accessories catching the light in ways that chrome shouldn't. And behind the windshields, I could see the drivers. Or what used to be drivers. They were slumped over their wheels in positions that would be impossible for living people to maintain, their heads tilted at angles that suggested broken necks, but their hands were moving on the steering wheels, jerking and twitching, and their trucks were closing the distance with an acceleration that defied physics and common sense. "May," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to tell me exactly what's going to happen when we hit that detour. No sugarcoating it, no holding back. What am I going to face?" She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that might have been respect or might have been pity. "The road will try to confuse you, make you think you're going the wrong way, make you doubt your instruments. Your GPS will go haywire, your speedometer will show impossible readings, your fuel gauge will drop to empty even though you just filled up. You'll see things on the side of the road, other wrecks, other trucks, people who need help. They're all illusions, all tricks to make you stop or slow down. And Harlan and Vernon. They'll try to force you off the road the same way I was forced off. They'll come up beside you, try to squeeze you toward the edge. Or they'll get in front of you and brake suddenly, try to make you rear-end them. Either way, if you go over that edge, you'll die. And then you'll be stuck here with us forever." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead despite the chill in the cab. The heater was running, but it couldn't seem to warm the air. Maybe that was because of May's presence, or maybe it was just the desert cold seeping in through invisible cracks. Either way, I was shivering as I drove, my hands slick on the steering wheel. "There has to be something I can do," I said. "Some way to fight back or protect myself." May was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with something, some decision she was trying to make. Finally, she said, "There might be one thing. It's risky, and I've never seen anyone try it before, but theoretically, it could work." "I'm listening." "The reason Harlan and Vernon are so strong is because they're anchored to the crash site. That's where their bodies are, buried in the wreckage at the bottom of the ravine. The county never recovered all the remains, just left everything down there because it was too expensive and too dangerous to mount a full recovery operation. So they're tied to that place, drawing power from it. But I'm different." "How are you different?" "My body was recovered. My family buried me in a cemetery in Reno with a proper headstone and everything. I'm not anchored the same way they are. I'm here by choice, trying to atone for leading them to their deaths. That gives me a little bit of freedom, a little bit of power that they don't have. And if I use all of it at once, concentrate everything I have, I might be able to create a barrier between you and them. Just for a few seconds, but maybe long enough for you to get through the detour and past the crash site. What happens to you if you do that?" Her smile was sad. "I don't know. Maybe I disappear completely. Maybe I move on to wherever I'm supposed to be. Maybe I just get weaker and fade away over time. But Gideon, if I don't do it, you're going to die tonight. I can see it. I've seen it enough times before to know the pattern, and I can't let that happen. Not again. Not when I have the power to stop it. May, you don't have to sacrifice yourself for me. I knew the risks when I took this load." "No, you didn't. You thought you knew, but you couldn't really understand until you were in it. And besides, I've been doing this for 37 years. I'm tired, Gideon. I'm tired of watching people die. I'm tired of running from Harlan and Vernon. I'm tired of being stuck on this road. Maybe if I help you get out, maybe if I do one last good thing, I can finally rest." I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to a ghost who's offering to sacrifice herself to save your life? "Thank you" seemed inadequate, and "don't do it" seemed selfish. So I just nodded and kept driving, watching the mile markers tick by 38, 37, 36. The sound of the phantom trucks behind us was deafening now, so loud that I could barely hear my own engine over their roar. My mirrors showed them right on my tail, maybe 50 yards back, their yellow headlights filling the cab with a sickly glow. I could see details now that I didn't want to see. the way their tires weren't quite touching the road, hovering a few inches above the asphalt, the way their exhaust pipes were belching black smoke that didn't dissipate but instead hung in the air like oil, the way the drivers' faces were visible through the windshields, gray and decaying, with eyes that glowed the same yellow as their headlights. Mile marker 35. The detour was just ahead, marked by a small reflective sign that said, "Road construction, next 2 miles." I could see where the highway split, the old road continuing straight into darkness, while the new detour curved to the right, following the contour of the hills. "Get ready," May said, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "As soon as you hit the detour, I'm going to do it. You'll feel a push, like a strong wind at your back. Don't fight it. Let it carry you through. And no matter what you see or hear, don't stop. Just keep the accelerator down and trust that the road ahead exists, even if it looks like it doesn't." "May, no time," she said, cutting me off. "They're making their move." I looked in my mirrors and saw that she was right. The phantom trucks were splitting up, one staying behind me while the other 2 moved to flank me on either side. They were going to try to box me in, squeeze me off the road at the exact moment when I was most vulnerable. It was a classic convoy tactic, something living truckers did to road rage drivers or aggressive cars. But this wasn't about road safety or teaching someone a lesson. This was about killing me and adding my ghost to their collection. The truck on my left pulled even with me, and I got a clear look at the driver. Or what used to be a driver. His skin was gray and papery, stretched tight over skull bones. His neck was bent at an angle that would have been instantly fatal for a living person, his head lolling to one side. But his hands were locked on the wheel, and his foot must have been jammed on the accelerator because his truck was matching my speed exactly. The name Murdoch was just barely visible on the door, faded paint that had once been red, but was now the color of dried blood. On my right, the second truck pulled up, its driver in the same condition. The name on this door said Pike, in letters that seemed to shimmer and fade even as I looked at them. Vernon's truck was even with my trailer now, starting to edge toward me, trying to force me toward the center line where Harlan's truck waited to complete the squeeze. "Now, May!" I shouted, though I knew she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The ghost woman beside me suddenly blazed with light, a cold, blue glow that filled the entire cab and spilled out through the windows. She raised her hands, and I felt the temperature drop so fast that frost formed on the inside of my windshield. Then she pushed, and the world exploded into motion. A wall of force hit the 2 flanking trucks and sent them careening away from me like they'd been swatted by a giant hand. Harlan's truck spun out to the left, its tires screaming on the asphalt even though they weren't touching it. Vernon's truck veered to the right, clipping the shoulder and sending up a spray of gravel that hung in the air like frozen rain. And I felt that push May had described, that wind at my back, propelling my truck forward with an acceleration that should have been impossible. The speedometer needle swung past 80, past 90, past numbers that my truck had never reached before and never should have been able to reach with a full load. The engine was screaming, the transmission was howling, but everything held together as we rocketed forward into the detour. The road ahead looked like it was made of shadows and starlight, more suggestion than substance, and I had to fight every instinct that told me to brake, to slow down, to stop before I drove off into empty air. But I trusted May. I kept my foot on the accelerator and my hands on the wheel and my eyes pointed straight ahead. And somehow, impossibly, the road stayed beneath my tires. I felt bumps and dips that shouldn't have been there, heard sounds that couldn't be real, saw shapes at the edge of my headlights that made no sense, but I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. Behind me, I could hear the phantom trucks regrouping, roaring with rage, trying to catch up. But May's barrier was holding them back. that blue light forming a wall between my truck and theirs. I could see her in the passenger seat, still glowing, but fading now, becoming more transparent with each passing second. The effort of holding them back was consuming her, using up whatever ethereal energy kept ghosts anchored to the world. "Almost there," she said, her voice faint now, barely a whisper. "Just a little further. Past the next curve. That's where the crash site ends. That's where they can't follow." The curve came up fast, too fast, and I took it at a speed that would have made any DOT inspector have a heart attack. The truck leaned, the load shifted, and for a terrible moment I thought we were going over, thought I was about to join May and Harlan and Vernon in their eternal highway patrol. But then we were through it, the road straightening out, and I saw lights ahead. Real lights, electric lights, the glow of Battle Mountain rising from the desert like a promise of salvation. The sound of the phantom trucks cut off abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. One second they were right behind me, roaring and raging, and the next second there was nothing but the normal sound of my own engine and the rush of wind past the cab. I checked my mirrors and saw only empty road behind me, the darkness complete and unthreatening. "May?" I said, turning to the passenger seat. She was barely visible now, just a faint outline, a suggestion of a person rather than the solid-looking ghost she'd been. But she was smiling. "You made it," she said, her voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "I knew you would. Are you okay? What's happening to you?" "I'm leaving," she said simply. "Going wherever I was supposed to go 37 years ago. It feels peaceful. Thank you, Gideon. Thank you for letting me help you. Thank you for seeing me when so many others couldn't." "May, wait, But she was gone. Between one blink and the next, the passenger seat was empty, the faint blue glow fading to nothing. The temperature in the cab started to rise back to normal, and I realized I was alone again. Just me and my truck and the long road ahead. I drove the rest of the way to Battle Mountain in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings. By the time I pulled into the mining facility to deliver my load, the sun was starting to rise, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. The receiving dock workers seemed confused about why I looked so shaken, why my hands were trembling as I signed the delivery paperwork. I told them I'd had a close call with some wildlife on the road, which wasn't entirely a lie. After I secured the empty flatbed and did my post-trip inspection, I called Thorne Kessler. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for my call. "You made it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I made it," I confirmed. "May Tolliver helped me, but Thorne, I think she's gone now, really gone. She used herself up to save me from Harlan and Vernon." There was a long pause. Then Thorne said quietly, "That sounds like May. She was always the type to put others first. I hope she found what she was looking for. Me too." We talked for a few more minutes, but my heart wasn't in it. I was exhausted, mentally and physically drained in a way that no amount of sleep would fully fix. When we hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and trying to process everything that had happened. Eventually, I started the engine and headed back toward Reno, taking the long way around via Highway 80. I didn't want to see Highway 722 again for a very long time, maybe never. As I drove, I found myself thinking about May, hoping that wherever she'd gone, she'd found peace, hoping that her 37 years of penance had been enough, that she'd been released from the guilt that had kept her tied to that cursed stretch of road. And I thought about Harlan and Vernon, still out there somewhere, still angry, still hunting, still trapped in a hell of their own making, unable to let go of the rage that had consumed their humanity. I wondered how many other drivers they'd catch before they finally burned themselves out or faded away completely. But mostly, I was just grateful to be alive, to be able to see the sunrise, to know that I'd have another chance to call my daughter and hear her voice. That's the thing about close calls with death, even supernatural death on haunted Nevada highways. They make you appreciate the simple fact of existence in a way that nothing else can. I never drove Highway 722 again. I made sure of that, even if it meant turning down loads or taking routes that cost me time and money. Some roads aren't worth traveling, no matter what they're paying. Some prices are too high, even for a trucker who needs every penny. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the Nevada darkness on Highway 50 or Highway 80 or any of the other lonely roads that crisscross this empty state, I think I see a faint blue glow in the distance, like a guardian angel watching over the highways. I like to think it's May, still trying to warn drivers away from danger even in whatever form she exists in now. I hope she's found peace. She earned it. 3 months passed after that night on Highway 722, and I told myself I was doing fine. I took loads that kept me in California and Oregon mostly, occasionally venturing into Idaho or Utah when the money was good enough. I avoided Nevada altogether at first, then gradually started taking runs through Reno and Carson City, always in daylight, always on the major highways. I told myself that May had freed me from whatever curse hung over that stretch of road, that her sacrifice had broken the connection between me and the phantom convoy. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. The nightmares started about 2 weeks after Battle Mountain. I'd wake up in my sleeper cab drenched in sweat, the sound of those impossible engines still echoing in my ears. In the dreams, I was always back on Highway 722, always driving through that detour, but this time May wasn't there to help me. This time, when Harlan and Vernon boxed me in, there was no escape. I'd feel my truck leave the road, that terrible moment of weightlessness before the fall, and then I'd wake up gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Thorne noticed the change in me. We met for coffee at a truck stop outside Sacramento one afternoon, and he took one look at my face and said, "You're not sleeping." It wasn't a question. I tried to brush it off, told him I was just dealing with the usual stress of the job, late deliveries and demanding dispatchers and equipment that always seemed to break down at the worst possible moment. But Thorne had known me too long to buy that line. "It's the convoy, isn't it?" he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "You're still seeing them." "Not seeing them exactly," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. "Just dreams, memories, it's getting better." But it wasn't getting better. If anything, it was getting worse. The dreams were becoming more vivid, more detailed, and I was starting to see things even when I was awake. Flickers of yellow light in my mirrors that disappeared when I looked directly at them. Shapes at the edge of my vision that might have been trucks, or might have been shadows. Once, while fueling up at a rest stop near Winnemucca, I could have sworn I heard someone calling my name in May's voice, but when I turned around, there was no one there. Thorne reached across the table and put his hand on my arm. "Listen to me, Gideon. What you went through, what you experienced, that leaves marks. Not physical marks, but psychological ones. You might want to talk to someone, a professional. There's no shame in it." "A therapist?" I almost laughed. What am I supposed to tell them? That I was chased by ghost trucks on a haunted highway? That a dead woman saved my life by sacrificing whatever was left of her soul? They'd have me committed. Then tell them you had a close call, a near-death experience. You don't have to mention the supernatural part. The trauma is real either way, and trauma needs to be dealt with or it festers. He squeezed my arm. "Promise me you'll think about it." I promised, but I had no intention of following through. Talking about it wouldn't change what happened. It wouldn't bring May back or lay Harlan and Vernon to rest. It would just be words, and words had never fixed anything in my experience. What I needed was time and distance, and maybe enough long hauls to other states that I could forget Nevada existed altogether. But the universe had other plans. 2 days after my conversation with Thorne, my dispatcher called with a load that made my blood run cold. Mining equipment from Sacramento to Ely, Nevada, with a delivery deadline that would require night driving. The route she suggested was Highway 50, the same road where I'd first encountered the Phantom Convoy. When I tried to negotiate for a different route or a later delivery time, she got irritated and reminded me that I'd been turning down Nevada runs for months, and she was running out of patience with my pickiness. "You're a trucker, Rexford," she said, her voice sharp. "You go where the loads are. If you can't handle that, maybe you're in the wrong line of work." The implied threat was clear. Take the load or start looking for a new company to lease to. In this economy, with fuel prices climbing and competition fierce, I couldn't afford to be unemployed. So I took the load, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me not to. I told myself it would be fine, that Highway 50 was different from Highway 722, that whatever haunted that detour couldn't reach me on the main road. I told myself that May's sacrifice had meant something, that I was safe now. I was wrong about that too. The run started normally enough. I left Sacramento at 4 in the afternoon, giving myself plenty of time to reach Ely before midnight. The weather was clear, the truck was running smoothly, and the load was properly secured. By the time I crossed into Nevada and merged onto Highway 50 eastbound, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been wound so tight with anxiety. I passed through Carson City and Silver Springs without incident, the towns bright with streetlights and the comforting presence of other vehicles. But as I pushed deeper into the empty stretches between settlements, that familiar dread started building in my stomach. The darkness out here was absolute, the kind of darkness that made you question whether anything existed beyond the reach of your headlights. The kind of darkness where anything could be hiding. Around mile marker 52, my CB radio crackled to life. I hadn't been monitoring it, had the volume turned down low because most of the chatter these days was just noise and advertisements. But now a voice came through, distorted and full of static, saying words I couldn't quite make out. I turned up the volume and keyed the mic. "This is Rexford eastbound on Highway 50. Whoever's trying to reach me, you're breaking up. Try again." The static cleared for a moment, and I heard it distinctly. A woman's voice, familiar and impossible. "Gideon, you need to turn back. They're waiting for you." My hands went numb on the steering wheel. "May? May, is that you?" More static, then her voice came through again, fainter this time. "Not May anymore. What's left? Gideon, please turn around. They found a way. They're not bound to 722 anymore. They're everywhere now. The whole road, The transmission cut off in a burst of white noise, and no matter how many times I tried to raise her again, there was only silence. I looked in my mirrors and saw nothing but darkness, but I could feel it now, that presence I'd felt before. That sense of being watched, of being hunted. They were out there somewhere, Harlan and Vernon, and somehow they'd escaped the boundaries that had confined them to that one stretch of cursed highway. I thought about turning around like May had warned me to, but I was already past the point of no return. Turning back would mean hours of lost time, a missed delivery, possible termination from my company, and where would I go anyway? If the Phantom Convoy could reach me here on Highway 50, maybe they could reach me anywhere. Maybe there was nowhere left to run. So I kept driving, pushing my speed up to 75, then 80. The engine protested but held steady. In the distance I could see the lights of Fallon, still maybe 15 miles away. If I could just reach the town, get around other people and vehicles and normal life, maybe I'd be safe. Maybe whatever rules governed the dead would keep them from manifesting in populated areas. That's when I saw the lights behind me. 3 sets of them, yellow and dim, maintaining that exact same distance they'd kept before. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt that same primal terror I'd experienced on Highway 722. They'd found me. Despite everything May had done, despite her sacrifice and her warning, they'd found me again. I grabbed the CB radio and started cycling through channels, calling for help, for anyone who might be out there. This is Gideon Rexford with an emergency on Highway 50 eastbound near mile marker 58. I'm being pursued by hostile vehicles. If anyone can hear this, I need help. A voice crackled back, male this time, older. Son, this is Ruford Pine on Channel 19. What kind of hostile vehicles are we talking about here? The name stopped me cold. Vernon Pine had been one of the ghost truckers, one of the dead drivers hunting me. But this voice sounded different, more solid, more real. Who did you say you were? Ruford Pine, driving westbound on 50. I'm about 5 miles from your position if you need assistance. What's your situation? Not Vernon. Ruford, a different person entirely, probably no relation. Just a coincidence. Just my paranoid mind making connections that weren't there. I've got 3 trucks following me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They've been maintaining the same distance for the last 10 minutes. Something feels wrong about it. Copy that. I'll keep an eye out when we pass each other. You want me to call the highway patrol? Yes, please. Tell them I broke off as the lights behind me suddenly accelerated, closing the distance faster than should have been possible. In seconds, they went from half a mile back to right on my tail, so close I could see details that made my skin crawl. The trucks were old Peterbilts, just like before, but now they looked even more wrong, even more corrupted. Their metal bodies seemed to shift and flow like they were made of liquid, and their yellow headlights had taken on a reddish tinge that made me think of infected eyes. They're coming up on me fast, I said into the radio, my voice rising. Ruford, if you can hear me, I need help now. But the radio had gone dead, just static and the occasional pop of interference. I was alone again, alone with the phantom convoy bearing down on me at impossible speeds. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, but my truck was already at its limit. There was nowhere left to go, no more speed to find, no clever maneuvers that would save me this time. The first truck, Harlan's truck, pulled up beside me on the left. I could see him clearly now through his side window, his gray, decaying face turned toward me, his broken neck causing his head to loll at that awful angle. But his eyes were locked on mine, and in them I saw an intelligence, a malevolence, that was somehow worse than mindless rage. He knew who I was. He remembered me, and he wanted me to know that this time there would be no escape. The second truck, Vernon's, pulled up on my right, boxing me in just like they'd done before. But now there was a third truck too, one I hadn't seen before, pulling up behind me so close that if I touched my brakes we'd collide. I was trapped in a moving cage of ghost trucks, and they were slowly, inexorably, forcing me toward the shoulder, toward the darkness, toward whatever fate they had planned for me. I thought about May, about her sacrifice, about how she'd given up everything to save me, and I realized with a sick certainty that it hadn't been enough. Maybe it had bought me a few months of borrowed time, but the debt was coming due. The road wanted what the road wanted, and apparently what it wanted was me. The lights of Fallon were visible now, tantalizingly close, maybe 5 miles ahead, but I knew I wouldn't make it. I could feel the phantom trucks tightening their formation, could hear their engines roaring with triumph. The shoulder was coming up fast, and beyond it, I could see the dark shape of a ravine, deeper and steeper than the one on Highway 722. If I went over that edge, there wouldn't be enough left of me to bury. Then I heard May's voice again, not on the radio this time, but inside the cab, like she was sitting right next to me in the passenger seat. "The third truck," she said urgently. "Gideon, look at the third truck behind you." I adjusted my mirror to get a better view of the truck tailgating me, and what I saw made my heart stop. The name on the door, barely visible in the red glow of my taillights, read Rexford. My own name. My own truck. But I was driving my truck, so what was behind me? What was wearing my truck's shape and bearing my name? "That's you," May's voice said, sad and resigned. "That's what you'll become if you die here tonight. Another angry ghost, another hunter, another piece of the convoy. They're not just trying to kill you, Gideon. They're trying to recruit you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about revenge or rage or feeding some supernatural hunger. This was about loneliness. Harlan and Vernon had been alone for so long, trapped in their endless cycle of hunting and killing, that they'd forgotten what it meant to be human. But some part of them remembered being part of a convoy, remembered the camaraderie of the road, the brotherhood of truckers watching out for each other. They wanted that again, even if it meant creating it through death and corruption. "What do I do?" I asked, not sure if May could even hear me, or if I was just talking to myself. "Let go," her voice said. "Stop fighting, stop running, just let go." Every survival instinct I had screamed against following that advice. Let go meant giving up, meant accepting death, meant joining the phantom convoy and spending eternity hunting other drivers on these cursed Nevada roads. But May had never steered me wrong before, and even in death, even as a fading echo of who she'd once been, I trusted her, so I did something that went against everything I'd learned in my years as a trucker. I took my foot off the accelerator. I let my speed bleed away, let the momentum die. The phantom trucks stayed with me, matching my deceleration, their formation holding steady. 60 miles per hour. 50, 40, 30. The lights of Fallon were so close now, maybe 2 miles ahead. But I wasn't going to make it at this speed, and I knew it. The phantom trucks were forcing me toward the shoulder, toward that ravine, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My tires hit the gravel at the road's edge, and I felt the truck start to slide. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory or a desperate last-minute escape, but in a slow, inevitable slide toward darkness. I thought about my daughter, about how she'd never know what really happened to her father, about Thorne, who would blame himself for not insisting I get help, about May, who had tried so hard to save me and failed. Then my truck lurched to a stop. Not a gradual stop, not the kind of stop you get from hitting your brakes. A sudden, violent stop, like I'd hit an invisible wall. The phantom trucks around me reacted with confusion, their formations breaking up, their engines revving uncertainly. And I saw them, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Other trucks, other vehicles forming a barrier between me and the ravine. Old pickups and modern semis, rusted sedans and pristine SUVs, all arranged in a protective circle with my truck at the center. They were ghosts, all of them. I could see through them to the desert beyond, could see the starlight passing through their forms. But they were solid enough to hold back the phantom convoy, solid enough to keep me from going over that edge. And standing in front of them all, coordinating them with hand signals like she was directing traffic, was May Tolliver. She looked different than before, more solid, more real, but also more at peace. The worry and guilt that had etched lines into her face were gone, replaced by a calm determination. She'd brought reinforcements, I realized. Every trucker who had ever died on Nevada's highways, Every driver who had left some echo of themselves on these roads, she'd somehow rallied them all to this spot. To save me. The phantom convoy circled us, Harlan and Vernon and that third truck wearing my name, their engines roaring with frustration. But they didn't attack. They couldn't break through the barrier of their fellow dead, couldn't overcome the collective will of so many ghosts united in a single purpose. For several long minutes, we all just sat there in a strange tableau, the living and the dead, the hunters and the protectors, frozen in a moment that seemed to exist outside of normal time. Then May raised her hand and pointed toward Fallon, toward the lights and the life and the safety of civilization. The message was clear: go, now, while we hold them back. I put my truck in gear and slowly, carefully, eased back onto the highway. The barrier of ghost vehicles parted to let me through, and I could see the faces of the drivers as I passed. Some I recognized from missing person posters I'd seen at truck stops. Some were older, from eras before my time. All of them were watching me with expressions that ranged from sadness to hope, to grim satisfaction. As I pulled away, I looked in my mirrors one last time and saw the phantom convoy trying to follow. But May and her army of ghost truckers moved to block them, forming a wall that Harlan and Vernon couldn't penetrate. The last thing I saw before distance and darkness swallowed the scene was May, standing with her arms outstretched, holding back the very ghosts she'd once driven alongside, giving me the time I needed to escape. I drove straight through Fallon without stopping. Didn't slow down until I hit Austin. Didn't feel safe until I crossed the state line into Utah as the sun was rising. I called my dispatcher from a rest stop and told her I was done with Nevada runs, that she could fire me if she wanted, but I wasn't going back. She tried to argue, but something in my voice must have convinced her I was serious because she backed down and said she'd work around it. I called Thorne next and told him everything that had happened. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "May really came through for you. Twice now, that's some kind of loyalty." "Yeah," I agreed. "But Thorne, that third truck, the one with my name on it, what does that mean? Am I already dead somehow? Is that my future?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe it was showing you what you'd become if you died there. Maybe it was a warning. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something we don't have the context to understand. The important thing is you're alive, and you're getting out of Nevada like you should have done months ago." But I couldn't shake the image of that third truck, of seeing my own name on a phantom vehicle driven by something that wore my face but wasn't me. Not yet, anyway. It felt like a promise or a prophecy, like the road was telling me that no matter how far I ran, eventually my time would come. Eventually, I'd be back on Highway 50 or Highway 722 or one of the 1,000 other lonely roads that crisscross this country. And when that time came, there would be no May to save me. No army of ghost truckers to hold back the darkness. There would just be me and the road and whatever waited at the end of it. That was 6 months ago, and I'm still driving. I've stuck to my decision to avoid Nevada, taking loads through other states even when it costs me money. But lately, I've been seeing things that worry me. Yellow lights in my mirrors on I-80 through Wyoming. A truck that looks like an old Peterbilt following me through Montana. Shapes at the edge of the rest stop parking lots that disappear when I look directly at them. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe the trauma of what I experienced has made me see threats where none exist. Or maybe the phantom convoy isn't bound by state lines anymore. Maybe they've been slowly spreading, infecting other highways, adding other dead truckers to their ranks. Maybe that third truck with my name on it is out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to manifest, to show me my inevitable future. I don't know. I just know that I keep driving, keep moving, because stopping feels like giving up. And I'm not ready to give up yet. Not while there's still fuel in my tank and road ahead of me and a slim chance that if I keep running, I might outpace whatever's chasing me. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on empty highways, I think about May and her sacrifice. I think about how she'd been running from Harlan and Vernon for 37 years before she finally stood and fought. 37 years of warnings and regrets and trying to save people who mostly couldn't even see her. And I wonder if that's my future too, if I'm destined to become another May Tolliver, trying to warn other truckers away from whatever fate claimed me. I hope not. I really, really hope not. Last week, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. All it said was, "They're coming for everyone now. The convoy grows. Stay off the empty roads, stay in the light, MT. May, still watching out for me from wherever she is now. Still trying to keep me safe, even though she gave up everything to do it once before." The message should have been comforting, but instead it filled me with a deep, bone-chilling dread. Because if May felt the need to warn me again, if the situation was bad enough that she was somehow reaching out from beyond death itself, then things were worse than I'd thought. I've started driving only during daylight hours now, even if it means shorter hauls and less money. I avoid any highway that doesn't have regular towns and traffic. I never stop in isolated areas, never pull over unless I'm at a well-lit rest stop with other people around. I'm living like a man under siege, and maybe that's exactly what I am. The question I can't answer is how long I can keep this up. How long before exhaustion or economics or simple bad luck puts me back on one of those empty roads after dark? How long before I see those yellow lights in my mirrors again, and this time there's no May to save me, no army of ghost truckers to hold them back? I don't have an answer. I just keep driving, keep watching my mirrors, keep hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'll be the one who gets away, the one who breaks the pattern, who survives when so many others didn't. But deep down, in a place I don't like to examine too closely, I know the truth. The road always gets what it wants eventually. And what it wants is me. It's only a matter of time. 2 nights ago, I had a dream. I was driving Highway 722 again, but this time I was the one behind the wheel of that phantom truck with Rexford on the door. My neck was broken, my skin was gray, and my eyes glowed that awful yellow color. And I was chasing another trucker, some poor soul who had made the mistake of being on the wrong road at the wrong time. In the dream, I didn't feel angry or sad or anything at all. I just felt empty, hollow, like everything that made me human had been scooped out and replaced with something else. Something that only knew how to hunt, how to chase, how to add to the convoy's numbers. I woke up screaming, and even though I was parked at a busy truck stop with dozens of other drivers nearby, I felt completely alone. Because I knew what the dream meant. It was another warning, another glimpse of my future. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday. Someday that third truck would become me, and I'd become it, and there would be no going back. I thought about quitting, finding a different line of work, getting off the roads entirely. But trucking is all I know, all I've ever been good at. It's in my blood, just like it was in May's blood, just like it was in Harlan's and Vernon's. We're road people, and road people don't do well when you take away the road. So I'll keep driving. I'll keep taking my precautions, heeding May's warnings, avoiding the empty places where the dead grow strong. And maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe I'll be the exception. The one who makes it to retirement age without joining the phantom convoy. But I don't really believe that. None of us do. The road always wins in the end. Last month, Thorne told me he was closing down his repair shop and retiring to Arizona. Said he was tired of the Nevada desert, tired of the stories he kept hearing from drivers who came through, stories about lights in their mirrors, about voices on the CB from dead truckers, about May Tolliver and the Phantom Convoy. He asked me to come with him, to leave trucking behind and start over somewhere safer. I told him I'd think about it, but we both knew I wouldn't go. I can't explain why, not in any way that makes rational sense. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's something else, some connection to the road that goes deeper than choice or reason. Or maybe I already know how this story ends, and I'm just going through the motions until that ending arrives. Either way, I'm still out here, still driving through the long Nevada nights, even though I swore I wouldn't, still watching my mirrors for yellow lights that shouldn't be there, still listening for May's voice on the CB, warning me away from danger one more time. And sometimes, when the night is very dark and very quiet, I think I can feel it. That third truck, my truck, following me at a distance, not close enough to see, not yet. But there, always there, patient, waiting. The convoy grows, May said. I believe her. And I think, sooner or later, I'm going to be part of it. The thing about driving trucks through Montana in February is that the weather doesn't just change, it transforms. One minute you're cruising through clear skies with visibility for miles, and the next minute you're inside a snow globe being shaken by an angry giant. I've been hauling freight through these mountains for going on 8 years now, and I still haven't learned to predict when those storms are going to hit. The meteorologists try their best, putting out advisories and warnings, but Mother Nature doesn't check the forecast before she decides to bury a highway under 3 feet of snow in the span of an hour. My name is Elias Creed, and I drive a Kenworth W900 that I bought used 5 years ago with money I'd saved from a decade of working for other people's companies. Going independent was the best decision I ever made, even if it meant shouldering all the risk and responsibility myself. When you own your own truck, when you're the one making the decisions about which loads to take and which routes to run, there's a freedom in it that employed drivers never quite understand. But that freedom comes with a price, and sometimes that price is finding yourself alone on a mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard with no one to blame but yourself. I was running a load of agricultural equipment from Billings to Missoula, taking Highway 12 through the Lewis and Clark National Forest because it shaved 40 miles off the alternative route through Helena. The load wasn't particularly heavy, maybe 30,000 pounds of tractor parts and irrigation components, but it was bulky and catching wind in a way that made the trailer want to push the cab around. I'd left Billings at 3 in the afternoon, planning to make Missoula by midnight with a fuel stop in White Sulphur Springs. The weather forecast had mentioned a possibility of light snow in the mountain passes, but nothing that seemed serious enough to worry about. By the time I reached White Sulphur Springs around 6 p.m., that light snow had turned into something considerably less light. The flakes were coming down thick and fast, reducing visibility to maybe 100 yards, and the wind was picking up in a way that made the truck shudder every time a gust hit the trailer. I pulled into the truck stop on the eastern edge of town and seriously considered calling it a night, finding a parking spot and waiting out the storm in my sleeper cab. But I was already running behind schedule because of a delay at the loading dock in Billings, and the customer in Missoula had made it clear they needed this equipment by morning. Early season planting was starting, and every day of delay meant lost revenue for them. So I topped off my fuel tanks, grabbed a thermos of coffee and a couple of sandwiches from the truck stop diner, and checked the road conditions on my phone. Highway 12 West was still open, though the Montana Department of Transportation had posted an advisory warning of deteriorating conditions. Chain requirements were in effect for commercial vehicles, which meant I'd need to spend 20 minutes in the cold installing tire chains before I could continue. I hate chain installations. The way the metal bites into your fingers, even through work gloves, the way you always end up lying in slush and road salt trying to get the hooks secured properly. But regulations are regulations, and I wasn't about to risk a citation or worse on top of everything else. The parking lot of the truck stop was nearly empty, which should have told me something. Most experienced drivers had already decided to wait out the storm, settling in for the night with hot food and warm bunks. But I'd never been accused of having too much sense, and the need to make my delivery on time overrode my better judgment. I installed the chains, tested them to make sure they were secure, and pulled back onto Highway 12 westbound just as the sun was setting behind the wall of clouds and snow. For the first hour, it wasn't too bad. The chains bit into the snow-covered asphalt and gave me decent traction, and my headlights were powerful enough to cut through the worst of the precipitation. Traffic was non-existent, which wasn't surprising given the conditions. A couple of times I passed vehicles pulled over on the shoulder, either waiting out the storm or dealing with mechanical issues, but I didn't stop to check on them. In weather like this, stopping can be more dangerous than continuing. And besides, everyone has cell phones these days. If they needed help, they could call for it. The CB radio had been quiet since I left White Sulphur Springs, just the occasional burst of static or the distant voice of some trucker on a different highway talking about road conditions or fuel prices. I kept it on Channel 19, the standard trucker channel, more out of habit than any expectation of conversation. Most drivers these days prefer their smartphones and Bluetooth headsets to the old CB systems, but I'm old school enough to appreciate having that connection to other drivers. That sense of shared experience that comes from hearing voices on the same frequency. Around mile marker 89, as I was climbing into the higher elevations where the road winds through dense pine forest and rocky outcroppings, the snow started coming down even harder. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet, and the wind was hitting the trailer so hard that I had to fight to keep the truck in my lane. The temperature outside had dropped to somewhere around 10 degrees, cold enough that the snow was dry and powdery, swirling around the truck in patterns that made it hard to tell where the road ended and the shoulder began. That's when I first heard the voice on the CB. It came through clear as day, cutting through the static like a knife. A man's voice with a deep Montana drawl. "Eastbound driver approaching mile marker 89. You're going to want to watch your speed through the next curve. Black ice under that fresh snow nearly put me in the ditch." I keyed the mic and responded, grateful for the warning. "Copy that. Appreciate the heads up. This is Elias Creed westbound at 89. Conditions are deteriorating fast up here." Static for a moment, then the voice came back. "Elias Creed, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. This is Ruford Pine, running eastbound about 2 miles from your position. How's your rig handling the chains?" The name meant nothing to me, but that wasn't unusual. There are thousands of truckers working Montana's highways, and I only knew a small fraction of them by name. Chains are holding good, but this wind is brutal. Thinking about finding a place to pull over and wait it out. "Smart thinking," Ruford said. "There's a rest area coming up at mile marker 85 westbound side. It's not much, just a parking lot and some picnic tables, but it'll get you off the main road. I used to stop there all the time back in the day." "Copy that. I'll keep an eye out for it. Stay safe out there, Ruford. You too, driver. Watch for that ice." The transmission ended, and I was alone again with the sound of the wind and the rhythmic thump of the chains on the pavement. But something about the conversation bothered me, though I couldn't immediately put my finger on what it was. The voice had been clear, too clear for the conditions and the amount of static on the channel. And there was something about the phrasing, back in the day, that suggested Ruford Pine hadn't used that rest area in a long time. I shook off the feeling and focused on the road. The curve Ruford had warned me about came up exactly where he said it would, and sure enough, I felt the tires lose traction for a moment as they hit a patch of ice hidden under the snow. The chains caught and held, but it was close enough to get my heart rate up. Without that warning, I might have been going too fast to recover, might have ended up in the ditch or worse. So, whatever else Rufford Pine might be, he'd just done me a solid favor. Mile marker 85 appeared out of the snow, and true to his word, there was a rest area on the westbound side. I slowed down and pulled in, finding a parking spot that was sheltered from the wind by a line of pine trees. The relief of being off the highway was immediate, like someone had lifted a weight from my shoulders. I could wait out the worst of the storm here, catch a few hours of sleep, and continue to Missoula once conditions improved. The customer might not be happy about the delay, but they'd be even less happy if I crashed their equipment into a mountainside. I shut down the engine, but left the auxiliary power running to keep the heater going, then climbed into the sleeper cab and poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos. Through the windshield, I could see the snow continuing to fall, already starting to drift against the side of the truck. This was going to be a long night. The CB radio crackled, and I heard Rufford's voice again. "Elias, you make it to that rest area okay?" I grabbed the mic. "Yeah, I'm here. Thanks again for the tip about the ice. You still heading east?" There was a pause, longer than normal for a CB conversation, filled with static that rose and fell like breathing. Then Rufford said, "I'm always heading east, driver. Always heading home. Been heading home for a long time now." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you mean? Where's home for you?" "Billings," he said. "Left Missoula with a load of timber in November of '91, heading home for Thanksgiving. Never made it. Storm came up just like this one, caught me right around mile marker 92. That black ice I warned you about, it got me good. Truck went off the road, down into Poorman's Creek Ravine. They didn't find me until spring thaw." My hand was frozen on the mic, my mind refusing to process what I was hearing. "Rufford, that's not funny. If you're trying to mess with me, not trying to mess with anyone, Elias, just trying to help. I've been on this stretch of road for 32 years now, warning drivers about that ice patch. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. The ones who don't, well, they usually end up down in the ravine with me. Company's not so bad, but I'd rather folks made it home to their families." I should have turned off the radio right then. Should have dismissed it as some kind of sick joke or a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But the clarity of his voice, the specific details, the genuine concern in his tone, all of it felt real in a way that I couldn't explain or dismiss. "Rufford," I said slowly, "if what you're saying is true, if you really are, what you're saying you are, why are you still here? Why haven't you moved on, or whatever it is ghosts are supposed to do?" The static rose again, almost drowning out his response. "Can't leave, Elias. Tried for years, but I'm tied to this road, to that ravine where my body is still sitting in what's left of my truck. The forest claimed most of it, rust and roots and decay, but I'm still there. And as long as I'm there, I'm here too, watching the highway, trying to keep other drivers from making the same mistake I did." I sat there in the dark cab, coffee forgotten in my hand, trying to decide if I was losing my mind. But then I remembered the warning about the ice, how specific and accurate it had been, how it had probably saved my life. If Rufford Pine was a ghost, he was a helpful one, and that seemed worth something. "Thank you," I said, finally, "for the warning, for probably saving my life. Is there anything I can do for you? Anyone I can contact? Any message I can deliver?" "No messages," Rufford said, his voice fading in and out. "Everyone I knew is gone now, moved away or passed on themselves. Just stay safe, Elias. Stay in that rest area until dawn. The storm's going to get worse before it gets better, and there are others out here on the highway tonight. Others who aren't as friendly as me." Others who want company in their misery and aren't above causing accidents to get it. What do you mean, others? But the only response was static, the endless hiss and pop of an empty frequency. I tried calling for Ruford several more times, but he didn't answer. Whether he'd moved on or simply didn't want to talk anymore, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I was alone again, parked in a rest area on a Montana mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard, trying to process a conversation with someone who claimed to have been dead for 32 years. I should have been terrified. By all rights, I should have started the truck and driven straight down the mountain, storm be damned, getting as far away from Highway 12 as possible. But I wasn't scared, not really. Ruford's voice had been kind, concerned, the voice of someone who still cared about the safety of other travelers even after death had claimed him. If ghosts existed, and if they could be like Ruford Pine, then maybe death wasn't quite as final or as frightening as I'd always assumed. Still, his warning about others being out here bothered me. Others who weren't as friendly, who wanted company in their misery. What did that mean? Were there other ghost truckers on this highway, malevolent ones who caused accidents instead of preventing them? The thought made me check my doors to make sure they were locked. A useless gesture against the supernatural, but one that made me feel slightly better nonetheless. The wind picked up even more, rocking the truck on its suspension, and the snow was coming down so thick now that I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the windshield. The rest area's single lamppost was barely visible through the whiteout, its light creating a small halo that couldn't penetrate the storm. I was completely cut off from the rest of the world, alone in a bubble of steel and glass with nothing but the storm and the radio for company. That's when I heard the second voice. Female this time, younger, with an edge of panic to it. "Please, if anyone can hear me, I need help. I'm off the road somewhere near mile marker 95. My truck is stuck in a ditch and I can't get it out. I'm losing heat and my phone has no signal. Please, someone respond." I grabbed the mic immediately. "This is Elias Creed, I copy you. What's your name and what kind of truck are you driving?" "My name is..." The voice faded into static, then came back. "Stuck for hours now. So cold. Please, I need someone to call for help." "Ma'am, you need to give me your exact location and a description of your vehicle so I can call the state patrol. What mile marker did you say?" More static, and when her voice came through again, it sounded different, deeper, angrier. "Mile marker 95. Come find me. Come help me. Come down into the ditch and keep me company. It's so lonely here in the dark." Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn off the radio, but I couldn't stop listening. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need immediate medical attention?" "Come find me," the voice said again, and now it didn't sound human at all. It sounded like wind and metal and breaking glass, like the moment of impact when a truck leaves the road and plunges into darkness. "Come down into the ditch with me. Stay here in the snow. Stay here forever." I turned off the radio with shaking hands, the sudden silence in the cab more frightening than the voice had been. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could feel cold sweat on my forehead despite the heater running. That hadn't been someone calling for help. That had been something else. Something using the CB to lure drivers off the road, to trick them into stopping in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is what Ruford had been warning me about. The others who weren't friendly, who wanted company in their misery. Whatever that thing was that had spoken through the radio, it was still out there somewhere near mile marker 95, waiting for the next truck to come along. The next driver foolish enough or compassionate enough to stop and help. I thought about turning the engine back on and leaving the rest area, but Ruford's advice to stay until dawn still echoed in my head. He'd been right about the ice, right about the storm getting worse, and I had to trust that he was right about this too. Whatever was out there on Highway 12 tonight, I was safer here in this rest area than I would be trying to navigate the mountain roads in zero visibility. So I stayed put, sitting in the dark cab with the radio off and my hands clenched on the steering wheel, listening to the wind howl and the snow accumulate on the windshield. And I tried not to think about how many other voices might be out there in the storm, how many other dead truckers were haunting this highway, some helpful, like Ruford, and some hungry for company in the endless dark. The night was going to be long, and dawn was still hours away, but at least I was alive to see it coming, for now. I must have dozed off sometime around 2 in the morning, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake to the sound of someone knocking on my driver's side window. My heart was already racing before I was fully conscious, that primal fear response kicking in before my brain could catch up. For a moment, I thought it was that thing from the radio, the entity that had pretended to be a stranded driver, somehow manifested in physical form outside my truck. But when I wiped the condensation from the window and looked out, I saw a living person standing there in the snow. She was an older woman, maybe in her 60s, wearing a heavy parka with the hood pulled up against the wind. Snow had accumulated on her shoulders and hood, suggesting she'd been out in the storm for a while. She was gesturing for me to roll down the window, her face creased with concern, or maybe cold. It was hard to tell in the dim light from my cab. Behind her, I could see the shape of another truck parked at the far end of the rest area, its running lights cutting through the darkness. I cracked the window an inch, cold air immediately rushing in and stealing the warmth from the cab. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Sorry to wake you, driver," she said, her voice rough from years of diesel fumes and cigarette smoke. "I'm Selma Grady. Been parked here since about 9 p.m. waiting out this damn storm. Saw your rig pull in earlier but didn't want to bother you until I heard something that concerned me." "What did you hear?" "You been monitoring your CB?" she asked, stomping her feet against the cold. "Because if you have, you might want to turn it off for the rest of the night. Something's wrong with the frequencies up here. I've been hearing things that don't make sense, voices that can't be real." The relief I felt was immediate and profound. I wasn't losing my mind, wasn't the only one experiencing something strange on the radio tonight. "I heard them too," I said. "A guy named Ruford Pine who claimed he died in 91, and then some woman who wanted me to come find her near mile marker 95. That second one definitely wasn't human." Selma's expression darkened, and she glanced back toward her own truck before returning her attention to me. "Ruford Pine, yeah. I've heard that name on the CB before. Always warns about the ice patch around mile marker 92. Some of the old-timers say he's real, that he really did die on this highway back in the 90s and his ghost still tries to help drivers. But that's the only friendly one. The rest of them, the other voices you might hear tonight, they're not trying to help. What are they trying to do?" "Depends on which one you encounter," she said, pulling her hood tighter as a gust of wind kicked up snow around us. "There's the woman who pretends to be stranded. She's probably the most dangerous. Lures drivers out into the storm, gets them disoriented, and then they end up in ditches, or worse. Then there's the convoy leader, who tries to get you to follow him through the mountain passes, claims he knows shortcuts that turn out to be dead ends or roads that don't exist anymore. And then there's the one that just screams. Screams. Yeah, just pure terror, like someone dying in real time. First time I heard it, I nearly drove off the road trying to find whoever was in trouble. Took me 3 more trips through here before I realized it was just another ghost, replaying the moment of their death over and over on the CB. Can't help them, can't stop them, just have to ignore it and keep driving. I processed this information, trying to reconcile it with everything I thought I knew about the world. How long has this been going on? These voices on the radio? Selma shrugged. Long as I've been driving this route, which is going on 20 years now. Some drivers say it's been happening since they put in Highway 12 back in the 50s. Others claim it started after that big pileup in '88, when 6 trucks went off the road during a whiteout, killed 9 people total, and supposedly their voices joined whatever was already out here. But honestly, I don't know the history. I just know the present, and the present is that you don't trust anything you hear on the CB between mile marker 80 and mile marker 100 when there's a storm. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? I asked. Why isn't this common knowledge among truckers? Because the ones who experience it either think they're going crazy or they're too spooked to talk about it. And the ones who do talk about it get laughed at, or worse. You try telling your dispatcher that you need a different route because ghosts are on the CB. See how long you keep your job. She paused, then added, "Plus, Highway 12 is already dangerous enough with the weather and the mountains. DOT doesn't need drivers spreading ghost stories on top of everything else. Bad for business, bad for morale." That made a grim kind of sense. The trucking industry ran on schedules and efficiency, not on accommodating drivers who claimed to hear dead people on the radio. Even if the experiences were real, even if dozens or hundreds of drivers had encountered the same phenomena, the pressure to keep quiet would be immense. Better to doubt your own sanity than to risk being labeled as crazy or unreliable. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Just sit here until dawn and hope the voices leave us alone?" "That's what I'm doing," Selma confirmed. "The voices seem to be more active when trucks are moving, like they're drawn to the sound of engines or the headlights or something. When you're parked and quiet, they mostly leave you alone. Mostly. Sometimes they'll try to lure you back out onto the road, but as long as you ignore them and keep your doors locked, you should be fine." "Should be fine," I repeated, not finding much comfort in the qualifier. "What happens if we're not fine?" Selma's expression grew serious, and she leaned closer to the window crack. "Then you end up like them. Another voice on the CB, another ghost haunting this highway trying to drag other drivers down with you. That's what I think anyway. Every trucker who dies on this stretch of road in bad weather, their voice gets added to the collection. And once you're in the collection, you're stuck here forever." The thought made my skin crawl. An eternity spent on a single stretch of highway, replaying your death or trying to cause others, unable to move on or find peace. If that was the fate waiting for drivers who made a wrong turn or trusted the wrong voice, then staying in this rest area until daylight was the smartest decision I'd made all week. "Thank you for the warning," I said. "I appreciate you coming over here to check on me." "Just looking out for fellow drivers," Selma said, stepping back from the truck. "We've got to watch each other's backs out here, especially when the dead are watching us too. Try to get some sleep if you can, but keep one ear open. If you hear anything that sounds wrong, anything that makes you want to start your engine and investigate, you fight that urge. You stay put until sunrise, no matter what. Understand?" "I understand." She nodded and trudged back toward her own truck, disappearing into the swirling snow. I watched until I saw her cab light come on, confirming she'd made it back safely, then rolled up my window and locked the door. The heater was working overtime to replace the cold air that had rushed in during our conversation, and I adjusted the thermostat to compensate. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't feel like drinking it anyway. Sleep seemed impossible now, my mind racing with everything Selma had told me. I thought about turning the CB back on to monitor the channel, but decided against it. Whatever was out there on the frequencies tonight, I didn't need to hear it. Better to sit in silence and wait for dawn than to risk another encounter with something pretending to be human. The storm was still raging outside, the wind howling through the pine trees and pushing snow against the truck in waves. If anything, conditions had worsened since I'd pulled into the rest area. The visibility was 0 now, complete whiteout conditions that would make driving suicidal even without the threat of malevolent ghosts trying to steer you off the road. Around 3:30 in the morning, I heard the screaming. Even with the CB turned off, even with my windows closed and the heater running, I could hear it. Not through the radio, but through the air itself. A sound that seemed to cut through the wind and the engine noise and penetrate directly into my skull. It was the sound of someone in mortal terror, high-pitched and desperate, wordless but communicating more horror than words ever could. The scream went on, rising and falling, but never quite stopping, and I understood what Selma had meant about it being a replay of someone's death. This was the sound of a person's last moments, captured somehow by this highway and broadcast into the night for any unfortunate soul to hear. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The screaming wasn't something you could block out with physical barriers. It was in your head, in your bones, resonating at a frequency that bypassed normal hearing and went straight to the primitive part of your brain that understood death and feared it. For 10 minutes, that felt like 10 hours. I sat there enduring that awful sound, my hands pressed against my ears, my eyes squeezed shut, my whole body rigid with tension. Then it stopped, just cut off mid-scream, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse because you kept expecting it to start again. I slowly lowered my hands from my ears, listening to the relative quiet of the wind and the heater, trying to convince myself that the screaming had been real and not some hallucination brought on by stress and fear. The CB radio, still turned off, suddenly crackled to life. I stared at it in horror as a voice came through, male this time, young and scared. "Is anyone out there? Please, someone respond. I can hear something outside my truck, something moving around in the snow. I think there's someone out there." My hand moved toward the mic before I could stop it, that same instinct to help that had nearly gotten me killed earlier tonight. But I caught myself and forced my hand back to my lap. This was another trick, another lure. There was no scared driver out there needing help, just another voice trying to get me to leave the safety of the rest area. "Please," the voice continued, more desperate now. "I can see it. There's something outside my window, looking in at me. Oh God, it's not human, it's not—" The transmission dissolved into static and screaming, different from the screaming I'd heard before, more visceral and immediate. Then it cut off entirely, and the radio went dead again, the power light blinking off even though I hadn't touched any controls. For a moment I thought about checking the fuses or the connections, but then I realized what had happened. The radio had turned itself on, and now it had turned itself off. Whatever forces were at work on this highway tonight, they could manipulate electronics as easily as they could manipulate sound. I spent the next hour sitting in perfect stillness, afraid that any movement or sound might attract unwanted attention. Through the windshield, I could occasionally see Selma's truck at the far end of the parking lot, her running lights a steady beacon in the chaos of the storm. Knowing she was there, knowing I wasn't completely alone, provided a small measure of comfort. But it also made me worry. If something happened to her, if one of those voices managed to lure her out into the storm, would I even know? Would I see her truck's lights go out, or would I just wake up at dawn to find her gone? Another victim of Highway 12's hungry ghosts. Around 4:30, I noticed something strange. The snow was still falling heavily, still being whipped around by strong winds, but there was a pattern to it now. The way the flakes moved, the way they swirled and gathered, it almost looked like shapes were forming in the air. Human shapes, or something close to human. I watched, transfixed and horrified, as what might have been a figure made of snow and shadow moved past my truck, seeming to pause and look in at me before dissipating back into the storm. Then there was another and another. dozens of them, maybe hundreds, walking through the rest area like they were following some invisible road only they could see. Some moved purposefully, like they had somewhere to be. Others wandered aimlessly, their forms constantly breaking apart and reforming. And a few stopped to examine the trucks, peering in windows or running translucent hands along metal surfaces. I held my breath each time one approached my cab, but none of them seemed to see me, or if they did, they chose not to interact. This went on for perhaps 20 minutes, this procession of snow-formed ghosts moving through the rest area. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The shapes dissolved, the snow returned to its normal random patterns, and I was left wondering if I'd really seen anything at all or if my exhausted mind was creating phantoms from wind and precipitation. The CB crackled again, and this time it was Ruford's voice, the helpful ghost who had warned me about the black ice. "Elias, you still there at the rest area?" I grabbed the mic, grateful to hear a friendly voice even if it was coming from someone who'd been dead for 3 decades. "I'm here, Ruford. Been a hell of a night." "I know," he said, his voice filled with sympathy. "I saw them too, the walkers. They come out during the worst storms, replaying their final journeys. Most of them died on this highway over the years, in crashes or from exposure. They're trapped here just like I am, but they're further gone. They don't remember being human anymore, don't remember their names or where they were going. They just walk." "How do you stay sane?" I asked. "How do you keep yourself from ending up like them?" "Honestly, I'm not sure I have stayed sane. Maybe I'm just as lost as they are, and I've convinced myself I'm still helping people to give my existence meaning. But I try to focus on what I was before the accident. My family, my friends, the life I had. As long as I can remember that, remember being Ruford Pine the person and not just Ruford Pine the ghost, I can hold on to some part of my humanity." "Do you know what causes this?" I asked. "Why this highway in particular? Why are there so many ghosts here?" Static filled the line for a moment. Then Ruford's voice came back fainter than before. "Some places are thin, Elias. Thin between the world of the living and the world of the dead. This stretch of Highway 12, it's one of those places. Always has been. Probably always will be. The Native Americans knew it, avoided this area except for sacred ceremonies. Then white folks came and built a highway right through the thinnest part, and now everyone who dies here gets stuck. We're like recordings, I guess. Imprinted on the landscape, playing back whenever conditions are right. Is there any way to help you? Any way to set you free? Appreciate the thought, but no. I'm tied to the place where I died, where my body still is, until someone clears out that ravine and gives me a proper burial. I'm stuck here. And honestly, even if they did, I don't know if it would work. The highway has a hold on us, all of us who died here. It doesn't like to let go." I was about to respond when another voice cut in, female and urgent. But this time I recognized it. It was Selma. "Elias, Ruford, if you're both monitoring this channel, I need help. There's something wrong with my truck. Engine won't turn over and I'm losing heat fast. Battery's dying." My first instinct was to start my engine and drive over to help her, but Ruford's voice stopped me cold. "Elias, don't. That's not Selma. I can tell the difference between the living and the dead, and whatever's on that frequency right now, it's not alive." But the voice sounded exactly like Selma, right down to the rough quality from years of smoking and the Montana accent. "Elias, please, I'm freezing. Just need a jump start or someone to let me warm up in their cab for a minute. Please, I'm at the far end of the lot, near the tree line." Selma was parked at the far end, I said to Ruford. "I saw her truck there earlier." "Look again," Ruford said. "Really, look." I wiped the condensation from my windshield and peered out into the storm. At first I couldn't see anything. The snow was too thick. But then the wind shifted slightly, clearing my view for just a moment, and I saw the far end of the parking lot. It was empty. No truck, no lights, no sign that anyone had been parked there. Either Selma had left while I wasn't paying attention, or she'd never been there at all. "Oh, God," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The woman who came to my window earlier, that wasn't really Selma, was it? "Probably not," Ruford confirmed. The things that haunt this highway, they're getting smarter. They used to just imitate generic distress calls, but now they're learning to take on specific forms, specific voices. They watch us, learn about us, then use that information against us. Whatever came to your window earlier, it must have picked the name Selma Grady from somewhere, maybe from an old accident report or a trucker manifest. Made itself look human enough to be convincing in the dark and the snow. "Then I've been alone here this whole time," I said, feeling the full weight of my isolation. "There's no other living person in this rest area." "You've got me," Ruford said, "for whatever that's worth. And Elias, the good news is that dawn is only about an hour away. You've made it through the worst of the night. Just stay in your truck, don't respond to any more voices, and when the sun comes up, get back on Highway 12 and drive straight to Missoula without stopping. Once you're out of this section, once you're past mile marker 100, you'll be safe." "What about you? Will you be okay?" Ruford's laugh was soft and sad. "I'm as okay as a ghost can be, I suppose. I'll keep doing what I've been doing for 32 years. Warning drivers, trying to keep them safe, hoping that maybe someday I'll have saved enough lives to make up for the one I lost. It's not much of an existence, but it's the only one I've got. Thank you, Ruford, for everything. I wouldn't have made it through tonight without you. Just doing my job, driver, or what used to be my job. Stay safe out there." The transmission ended, and I was alone with my thoughts and the slowly weakening storm. The wind was dying down, the snow falling less heavily, and through the clouds I could see the faintest hint of gray on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming, bringing with it the promise of safety and normalcy. Just one more hour, and I could leave this cursed rest area behind. I spent that hour in a state of exhausted vigilance, watching the slowly brightening sky and ignoring the occasional voice that still tried to get my attention on the CB. None of them sounded like Ruford, so I didn't respond. When the sun finally rose, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, I felt a profound sense of relief. I'd survived the night. Whatever ghosts or entities haunted Highway 12, they'd failed to claim me. I did a quick inspection of my truck, checking the chains and making sure everything was secure for the drive ahead. The storm had deposited maybe 6 inches of fresh snow on top of what was already there, but the parking lot had been plowed at some point in the early morning, leaving clear lanes for trucks to maneuver. I started the engine, let it warm up for a few minutes, then carefully pulled back onto Highway 12 westbound. The drive to Missoula was uneventful in the way that only a post-storm drive can be. The road was slick but passable, the sky clear, the mountains beautiful in their coating of fresh snow. I passed the spot where Ruford had warned me about black ice, past the area where that female voice had claimed to be stuck in a ditch, past all the mile markers that had seemed so threatening in the dark. In daylight, with the sun shining and other traffic returning to the highway, it was hard to believe that any of the previous night's events had been real. But they had been real. I knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason. Ruford Pine was real, or as real as a ghost could be. The malevolent entities that had tried to lure me off the road were real. And somewhere in the wreckage at the bottom of Poorman's Creek Ravine, there was still a 91-era truck with human remains inside, waiting for someone to give them a proper burial. When I reached Missoula and delivered my load, I filed a report with the Montana State Patrol about possible human remains in a ravine near mile marker 92 on Highway 12. I didn't mention ghosts or CB radio voices, just said I'd heard from another trucker that there might be an old accident site that was never properly cleared. The officer who took my report seemed skeptical, but said he'd pass the information along to the appropriate department. I don't know if they ever investigated. I don't know if they found Ruford's truck or gave him the burial he deserved. I like to think they did, that maybe my report led to some closure for his family and peace for his spirit, but I never drove Highway 12 again to find out. Some roads leave marks on you, and not all of them are visible. That highway took something from me that night, some part of my certainty about how the world worked, and I don't ever want to go back. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through other mountain passes and other storms, I'll hear a voice on the CB that sounds familiar. A deep Montana drawl warning about ice or wind or some other hazard ahead, and I'll key the mic and say thanks, Ruford, even though I know he can't hear me, even though I'm hundreds of miles from Highway 12, because maybe he can hear me. Maybe the CB frequencies connect in ways we don't understand, creating bridges between the living and the dead. And maybe, just maybe, a ghost in Montana appreciates knowing that someone out there remembers him, remembers what he's doing, remembers that he was more than just another trucker who died on a dangerous highway. I hope so. I really, really hope so. 3 weeks after that night on Highway 12, I convinced myself I was done with Montana altogether. I started taking loads that kept me in the Southwest, running routes through Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado, where the biggest danger was heat exhaustion rather than blizzards and ghost truckers. My dispatcher complained about my sudden geographic restrictions, but I made up excuses about wanting to explore new markets and diversify my client base. She bought it, or at least pretended to, and for almost a month I managed to avoid anything north of the Wyoming border. But the trucking business has a way of forcing your hand, and economics eventually overrode my caution. A regular client in Phoenix needed equipment delivered to Great Falls, Montana, and they were willing to pay premium rates for expedited service. The money was too good to pass up, especially with my truck payment coming due and maintenance costs piling up from all those extra miles I'd been putting on avoiding the northern routes. So I took the load, telling myself that Great Falls was nowhere near Highway 12, that I could take Interstate 15 the whole way and never get close to that haunted stretch of mountain road. What I didn't account for was the early spring weather. March in Montana is unpredictable at best and treacherous at worst. A month where winter refuses to release its grip and storms can materialize out of nowhere. I was making good time up I-15, somewhere between Butte and Helena, when my dispatcher called with news that made my stomach drop. A jackknifed semi had shut down the interstate about 40 miles ahead, and they were estimating at least 6 hours before the road would reopen. If I wanted to make my delivery window, I'd need to take the alternate route through the mountains. Highway 12 was that alternate route. I sat on the shoulder with my hazard lights flashing, staring at the GPS screen that showed the detour in stark red lines. There were other options, longer routes that would add hundreds of miles and eat into my fuel budget, but none of them would get me to Great Falls on time. The customer had been explicit about the deadline. This was replacement equipment for machinery that had broken down during critical spring operations, and every hour of delay cost them thousands of dollars in lost productivity. If I missed the window, I'd not only lose this payment, but probably lose the client altogether. The rational part of my brain said that my experience 3 weeks ago had been an anomaly, a perfect storm of bad weather and exhaustion that had made me susceptible to hallucinations or misinterpretation. Ghosts weren't real. Dead truckers didn't haunt highways. The voices on the CB had probably been some kind of atmospheric interference or pranksters with too much time on their hands. In daylight, with clear weather and full visibility, Highway 12 would be just another road. But the part of my brain that remembered Ruford Pine's warnings and that inhuman voice trying to lure me into a ditch knew better. That part understood that some places were thin between worlds, that Highway 12 had claimed too many lives to be just another stretch of asphalt. Taking that route again, even in daylight, felt like tempting fate. I called my dispatcher back and tried to negotiate, but she was firm. Take the detour or explain to the client why their equipment would be a day late. When I hesitated, she added something that made my decision for me. Look, Elias, I don't know what happened to you on that road last month, but you can't let one bad experience dictate your whole career. You're a professional driver. Act like one. So I took the detour. I merged onto Highway 12 eastbound just after 2 p.m., under clear skies with the March sun bright enough to make me reach for my sunglasses. The road was dry, the pavement clear of ice and snow, and there was enough traffic to make me feel like I wasn't alone out here. A couple of other commercial vehicles had obviously made the same decision I had, choosing the mountain route over waiting for the interstate to reopen. We formed a loose convoy, maintaining visual contact but not coordinating or communicating, just fellow travelers sharing the same stretch of road. For the first 20 miles, everything was fine. The highway wound through valleys and along ridgelines, offering spectacular views of snow-capped peaks and dense forests. This was Montana in its postcard glory, the kind of scenery that reminded you why people called it Big Sky Country. If there were ghosts here, they were staying quiet and invisible, and I started to think that maybe my dispatcher had been right. Maybe I'd let one strange night blow itself up into something bigger than it really was. Then I passed mile marker 80, and my CB radio came to life even though I'd left it turned off. Ruford Pine's voice emerged from the speaker, urgent and strained in a way I'd never heard before. Elias Creed, if that's you coming through here in daylight, you need to turn around right now. Something's wrong today. The boundary is thinner than I've ever felt it. They're all stirred up, all angry. It's not safe. I grabbed the mic with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel. Ruford, I thought you said the ghosts were only active during storms. That's what I thought too. But I was wrong. It's not the weather that makes them strong, it's the alignment. I don't understand all of it, but there are days when the barrier between their world and ours gets paper thin, and today is one of those days. You need to get off this highway before you reach the danger zone. I'm already at mile marker 82, I said, checking my position. What's the danger zone? Mile marker 85 through 100, the heart of it, where most of the accidents happened, where most of us died. On a day like today, in that section, they can do more than just talk through the CB. They can manifest physically, affect the real world. Elias, I've seen it happen before. Trucks that suddenly lose control for no reason, engines that seize up, steering that locks. The dead reaching through to cause the kinds of accidents that killed them in the first place. I looked in my mirrors at the other trucks traveling behind me, wondering if they were hearing this conversation or if Ruford was somehow directing his message specifically to me. What about the other drivers on this road? Are they in danger too? Anyone who can hear me is in danger. But you, Elias, they remember you from last time. You're marked now. They'll come for you first and strongest. The temperature in my cab suddenly dropped, going from comfortable to freezing in the span of a few seconds. My breath started fogging in front of my face, and frost began forming on the inside of my windshield despite the heater running full blast. This wasn't mechanical failure or some explainable weather phenomenon. This was something else, something responding to Ruford's warning, or maybe to my presence on this road. It's already starting, I said into the mic, my voice tight with fear. Temperature just dropped maybe 40 degrees in my cab. What do I do? Keep driving, keep your speed steady, and whatever you do, don't stop. There's a turnoff at mile marker 84 that'll take you down to Highway 200. It's a longer route, but it'll get you out of the danger zone. Take that exit and don't look back. I was about to respond when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Ahead of me, maybe a quarter-mile up the road, one of the trucks that had been part of our loose convoy was slowing down and drifting toward the shoulder. At first, I thought they were pulling over for some reason. Maybe mechanical trouble or a need to check their load. But the way the truck was moving wasn't right. It was jerky, uncertain, like the driver was fighting with the controls. Then I saw the figure in the middle of the road. It looked like a woman standing with her back to the oncoming truck, completely motionless, wearing what might have been a long coat or dress. The truck ahead of me wasn't slowing down fast enough, wasn't going to stop in time, and I braced myself for the impact that seemed inevitable. But instead of hitting her, the truck swerved violently at the last second, overcorrecting and fishtailing across both lanes. The trailer swung wide, the whole rig going into a jackknife, and then it was rolling, metal screaming and glass shattering as thousands of pounds of truck and cargo tumbled off the road and down the embankment. The sound was horrific, a cacophony of destruction that seemed to go on forever, even though the whole sequence probably took less than 5 seconds. And the figure in the road was gone. Just disappeared like it had never been there at all. "Ruford, there's been an accident," I said into the CB, my voice shaking. "A truck just rolled, trying to avoid something in the road. I need to stop and help." "No." Ruford's voice was sharp, commanding. "That's what they want. They cause accidents to lure other drivers into stopping, and then they cause more accidents. You keep driving, Elias. You call 911 and report it, but you keep moving. That driver is either dead or they're not, and you stopping won't change that outcome. All it'll do is add you to the body count." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop, to check for survivors, to do something other than just drive past a catastrophic accident. But I'd trusted Ruford before, and it had saved my life, so I trusted him now. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, giving them the location and description of the accident while I maintained my speed and passed the wreckage. In my mirrors, I could see smoke rising from the overturned truck, see the debris scattered across the road, see the twisted metal that had been a working vehicle just seconds ago. But I didn't stop. I kept driving, hating myself for it, but understanding that Ruford was right. The dead were hunting today, and I couldn't help their victims by becoming one myself. The turnoff for Highway 200 appeared ahead, and I took it without hesitation, feeling like I was abandoning a battlefield. As soon as I left Highway 12, the temperature in my cab started rising again, the frost melting from my windshield and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me lifted. The transition was so abrupt, it was almost disorienting, like stepping from a freezer into a sauna. "I'm off Highway 12, I reported to Ruford. "I'm on 200 now. Is it safe here?" Static was my only answer. Whatever connection I'd had with Ruford Pine, whatever frequency allowed us to communicate across the barrier between life and death, it didn't extend beyond Highway 12. I was on my own again, driving through normal daylight on a normal highway where the only dangers were the mundane ones that all truckers faced. But I couldn't shake the image of that truck rolling, couldn't stop hearing the sound of metal tearing and glass breaking. Someone had died back there, or at minimum been seriously injured, and I'd just driven past without stopping to help. The guilt was crushing, even though I knew intellectually that Ruford had been right. Stopping would have put me in danger, maybe gotten me killed, and wouldn't have changed what had already happened. I delivered my load to Great Falls 3 hours later than scheduled, the extra miles from the detour eating into my margin. The customer wasn't happy about the delay, but when I explained there had been an accident on Highway 12 that had forced me to take an alternate route, they backed off. News of the rollover had already made it to the local radio stations, confirming that what I'd witnessed had been real and not some hallucination. The driver's name was released the next day. Harold Pritchard, age 54, from Bozeman. Died at the scene from massive trauma. He'd been hauling agricultural supplies, same as me, just trying to make a living and get his freight delivered on time. The accident report cited loss of control due to unknown causes, possibly a mechanical failure or a moment of inattention. There was no mention of a figure in the road, no acknowledgement that anything supernatural might have been involved. But I knew. Harold Pritchard hadn't lost control because of mechanical failure or inattention. He'd swerved to avoid something that shouldn't have been there, something that appeared specifically to cause his death. And how many other accidents on Highway 12 had similar explanations that were never recorded, never investigated, never acknowledged? I thought about calling the Montana State Patrol and telling them what I'd seen. But what good would it do? They'd think I was crazy or lying, trying to explain away my failure to stop and render aid. And even if they believed me, what could they do about ghosts? You can't arrest the dead, can't put up warning signs about supernatural hazards. That night, alone in a motel room in Great Falls, I did something I'd been avoiding since my first encounter on Highway 12. I started researching the history of that highway, digging through old newspaper archives and accident databases, looking for patterns and connections. What I found was disturbing. Since Highway 12 opened in 1962, there had been over 300 fatal accidents along that stretch between mile markers 80 and 100. 300 deaths in 60 years, on a relatively low-traffic mountain road. The statistics were significantly higher than comparable highways in similar terrain and weather conditions. And when I broke down the data by date, I found something even more disturbing. The accidents clustered, not randomly throughout the years, but in specific patterns. Roughly every 6 weeks, there would be a spike in fatal crashes, sometimes multiple accidents on the same day. The pattern held going back decades, consistent and predictable as a tidal chart. And when I cross-referenced those spike dates with astronomical data, I found the connection. They aligned with specific lunar phases and seasonal transitions, times when the barrier between worlds was traditionally considered to be thinnest according to various spiritual and mystical traditions. The dead weren't just haunting Highway 12. They were actively hunting, and they were doing it according to a schedule that could be predicted if you knew what to look for. That's what Ruford had been trying to warn me about, what he'd meant by alignment. Today had been one of those spike days, a day when the dead could reach through and affect the physical world more easily than usual. I created a spreadsheet of the dates, marking every 6-week cycle for the next year. Then I made myself a promise. I would never, under any circumstances, drive Highway 12 on one of those dates. I didn't care how much money was involved, didn't care how important the delivery was. Some risks weren't worth taking, and deliberately putting myself in the path of supernatural predators was at the top of that list. But as I stared at the spreadsheet, a disturbing thought occurred to me. What about the other drivers who didn't know? The ones who would take that highway on a spike day without any understanding of what they were facing. They'd be like Harold Pritchard, encountering something they couldn't explain or defend against, dying without ever knowing why. I thought about Ruford Pine, spending 32 years trying to warn drivers one at a time through CB radio conversations. It was noble, but ultimately futile. He couldn't reach everyone, couldn't monitor every vehicle on that highway. For every driver he saved, a dozen more must have passed through without ever hearing his warnings. Someone needed to do more. Someone needed to make this information public, to warn people about the patterns even if they couldn't or wouldn't believe in the supernatural explanation. If I could convince even a few trucking companies to route their drivers around Highway 12 on spike days, if I could get the state to increase patrols or close the road during high-risk periods, maybe I could prevent some of those deaths. The next morning, I started making calls. First, to the Montana Department of Transportation, where I presented my statistical analysis without mentioning ghosts. I framed it purely as a pattern recognition issue, showing them the clustering of accidents and suggesting increased enforcement and monitoring on the identified high-risk dates. The bureaucrat I spoke with seemed interested, promised to pass the information along to the appropriate department, but I could tell he was skeptical. Statistics could be manipulated to show anything, and I was just a truck driver with an Excel spreadsheet, not a trained analyst. Next, I tried reaching out to trucking companies and driver advocacy groups, sharing my data and my concerns. Most ignored me completely. A few responded with polite dismissals, thanking me for my input, but explaining that they couldn't make routing decisions based on unverified statistical anomalies. One dispatcher was more blunt. "Look," he said, "even if you're right about there being more accidents on certain days, that doesn't mean we can just avoid those days. Freight needs to move when it needs to move. We can't tell customers their deliveries are delayed because of some spooky pattern a driver noticed." I tried posting about it online, in trucker forums and safety discussion groups. That got more response, but not the kind I was hoping for. Some people thanked me for the information and said they'd keep it in mind. Others accused me of fear-mongering or trying to damage Montana's economy. A few told their own stories of strange experiences on Highway 12, confirming that I wasn't alone in what I'd encountered. But none of it translated into concrete action, into changes that might actually save lives. The most frustrating response came from a traffic safety researcher at a Montana university who reviewed my data and told me I was suffering from apophenia, the tendency to see patterns in random information. The clustering I'd identified could easily be explained by weather patterns, holiday traffic, and other mundane factors, he said. There was no need to invoke supernatural causes or suggest that certain dates were inherently more dangerous than others. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing connections that didn't exist, letting my traumatic experiences color my interpretation of statistics. But I'd been there. I'd heard Ruford Pine's voice, had felt the temperature drop in my cab, had watched Harold Pritchard's truck roll after swerving to avoid something that disappeared. I knew what I'd experienced even if I couldn't prove it to anyone else. A week after my failed attempts at whistleblowing, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard static for a moment, then a familiar voice. "Elias, this is Ruford. I don't know if this will work, reaching you when you're not on Highway 12, but I had to try." I nearly dropped my phone in shock. "Ruford, how are you calling me? I'm in Arizona right now." I don't really understand it myself. The boundaries are strange sometimes, especially when someone's thinking about us as hard as you've been thinking about that highway. I wanted to thank you for trying to warn people, even though it didn't work. You know about that. I know about everything that happens on my highway, and I hear things in the static, in the spaces between channels. You tried to help, and that matters even if it didn't change anything. But Elias, I need you to understand something. You can't save everyone. Some people are going to drive Highway 12 on dangerous days no matter what you do, and some of them are going to die. That's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to prevent. Then whose responsibility is it? I asked, frustrated. If not mine, if not the state's, if not the trucking companies, then who's supposed to do something about a highway that kills people according to a predictable schedule? Ruford was quiet for a long moment. Maybe it's just the nature of thin places. Maybe some roads are meant to be dangerous. Some boundaries are meant to leak. Humans built a highway through a place where the dead walk close to the living, and now both groups have to deal with the consequences. The best you can do is protect yourself and help the people you can reach directly. That's not good enough. I know, but it's all we've got. The call disconnected, and when I tried to call the number back, I got an automated message saying the number was not in service. Rupert had somehow reached across whatever divide separated us to deliver that message, and now he was gone again, back to his eternal patrol of Highway 12. But his words stayed with me. Protect yourself and help the people you can reach directly. I couldn't change state policy or convince corporations to alter their routing, but I could warn individual drivers, share my story, and hope that at least some of them would listen. So that's what I started doing. Whenever I met another trucker at a rest stop or a fuel station, if the conversation turned to routes through Montana, I'd mention Highway 12 and the patterns I'd noticed. I didn't lead with ghosts or supernatural explanations, just presented the statistics and suggested avoiding certain dates if possible. Some people thanked me for the tip. Some looked at me like I was crazy. But a few, a precious few, said they'd keep it in mind and adjust their schedules accordingly. It wasn't much. It probably didn't save any lives. But it was something, and something was better than nothing. 2 months after my encounter with Harold Pritchard's death, I was hauling a load through Wyoming when I stopped at a truck stop outside of Sheridan. While I was fueling up, I noticed another driver standing by his rig, staring at his phone with a troubled expression. Something about his posture caught my attention, so I walked over and asked if everything was okay. "Just got my route assignment," he said, showing me his phone screen. "I'm supposed to take Highway 12 through Montana tomorrow, and I've heard some weird things about that road, trying to decide if I should request a different route." I looked at the date on his phone and felt my blood run cold. Tomorrow was one of the spike days, one of the 6-week intervals when the dead walked strong on that highway. "Request the different route," I said firmly. "I've driven Highway 12, and trust me, you don't want to be there tomorrow." He looked at me skeptically. "Why? What's wrong with tomorrow specifically?" So I told him. Not everything. Not about Ruford Pine, or the voices on the CB, or the figure that had caused Harold Pritchard's death. Just enough to make him understand that this wasn't superstition or paranoia, that there was a real pattern of danger he'd be wise to avoid. When I finished, he stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Okay, I believe you. Or at least I believe you believe it, and that's enough. I'll tell my dispatcher I need a different route. Thanks for the warning." As he walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe I was making a difference, that maybe my experiences on Highway 12 could prevent someone else from suffering the same fate as Harold Pritchard. That night, I had the most vivid dream I'd experienced since childhood. I was standing on Highway 12, at mile marker 92, where Ruford Pine had died all those years ago. But instead of a snow-covered winter landscape, the scene was bathed in golden sunlight, warm and peaceful, and standing beside me was Ruford, looking solid and real and alive. "You did good today," he said, smiling. "That driver you warned, he would have died tomorrow. Blown tire, loss of control, same stretch where Harold went over. But now he won't be there. He'll take a different route, live to drive another day, go home to his family. You saved a life, Elias. However you managed to do it, you saved someone from joining me and the others." "How do you know?" I asked. "How can you see the future?" "Time works differently for us. We exist in all our moments at once, past and present and future bleeding together. I can see the accident that would have happened because from my perspective it already did happen. Or it will happen. Or it's happening right now. The tenses don't work right anymore. He shook his head, frustrated by the inadequacy of language. The point is, you changed something. You altered the pattern, and maybe if you keep doing that, keep warning people one at a time, you can save more. It's not enough, I said. There should be systemic change, official warnings, route restrictions on dangerous days. Probably, Ruford agreed. But until that happens, one life at a time is what we've got. And Elias, one life matters. One person going home to their family instead of dying on this highway, that matters more than you know. I woke up with tears on my face, not sure if the dream had been just a dream, or if Ruford had somehow visited me across the boundary between worlds. Either way, the message was clear. I couldn't save everyone, couldn't change the system, couldn't force the world to acknowledge the supernatural dangers lurking on Montana's highways. But I could warn individual drivers. I could share my knowledge, one conversation at a time, and hope that some of them would listen. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what I had, and I was going to keep doing it for as long as I kept driving these roads. For 6 months, I kept my promise to myself and to Ruford. I warned every driver I could about Highway 12 and the spike days, showed them my spreadsheet, shared enough of my story to make them take the threat seriously without sounding completely unhinged. Some listened, some didn't. I tried not to think too hard about the ones who didn't. Tried not to check the accident reports from Montana to see if any of the drivers I'd failed to convince had ended up as statistics on that cursed stretch of highway. I was making a fuel stop outside of Billings on a warm September afternoon when I met Selma Grady for the first time. The real Selma Grady, not whatever entity had impersonated her during that February storm. She was an older woman, maybe 65, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of squinting through windshields. She pulled up to the pump next to mine in a well-maintained Freightliner, and I noticed the Montana plates and the Silver State Logistics decal on the door. Something about that company name triggered a memory, though I couldn't immediately place it. I nodded at her in the universal trucker greeting, and she nodded back, and that would have been the end of it except she spoke first. "You're Elias Creed, aren't you?" she said, shutting off her pump. "I've heard about you. The guy who warns drivers about Highway 12. I was surprised enough that it took me a moment to respond. "Yeah, that's me. How did you—" Word gets around in the trucking community, especially when someone's saying things that sound crazy but turn out to be true. I know 3 drivers personally who changed their routes because of your warnings, and all 3 of them later learned there were fatal accidents on Highway 12 the exact days they would have been there. That's not coincidence. That's you saving lives. "I'm just sharing information," I said, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone with access to accident reports could have spotted the pattern. But you're the only one who did spot it, and you're the only one who's been warning people despite everyone thinking you're paranoid or delusional. She extended her hand. "I'm Selma Grady. I've been driving Montana highways for 23 years, and I've seen things that would make your Highway 12 stories sound tame by comparison." I shook her hand, and that's when the memory clicked into place. Silver State Logistics. That was May Tolliver's company, the dispatcher who died on Highway 722 in Nevada back in 1987. Selma's eyebrows rose. "You know about May?" "That was before my time with the company, but yeah." Silver State took a big hit after that accident. Lost 3 drivers in one night. Never really recovered. The company folded in '88, but some of us who worked there kept the name alive, sort of an informal memorial. I used the decal to honor the drivers we lost. "Have you ever driven Highway 12? I asked, something in her tone making me think she had her own experiences with that road. More times than I can count. It's part of my regular route, or it was until I started paying attention to the patterns you identified. Now I avoid it on spike days, take the long way around even though it costs me time and fuel. Because you're right, Elias. That highway is hungry, and it feeds on a schedule. We ended up having coffee in the truck stop diner, and Selma told me stories that made my encounters with Ruford Pine seem almost benign by comparison. She'd been driving through Highway 12 during the big pileup in '88, had barely avoided being part of it by pulling off the road just minutes before the whiteout hit. She'd heard voices on the CB that night too, dozens of them, all crying out for help or warning about conditions ahead, or just screaming in terror as their vehicles left the road. 9 people died that night, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. But on the CB, it sounded like hundreds, like everyone who'd ever died on that highway was suddenly speaking at once, all their voices layered on top of each other. I sat in my truck for 6 hours, listening to that chorus of the dead, and by the time dawn came and the storm cleared, I was a different person. You can't hear something like that and stay the same. Did you ever encounter Ruford Pine? I asked. He told me he's been trying to warn drivers since '91. Selma nodded slowly. I've heard him a few times over the years. Always the same warning about the black ice at mile marker 92. Always sounds genuine, concerned, like he really cares about keeping people safe. But Elias, here's the thing. I've done some research of my own into the history of that highway, and I found something disturbing about Ruford. What do you mean? He did die in a crash at mile marker 92 in November of '91. That part's true. But the accident report says he was driving drunk, way over the legal limit. He'd stopped at a bar in Missoula, drank for 3 hours, then got back on the highway against the advice of the bartender who'd tried to call him a cab. He caused his own death through reckless behavior, and when his truck went into that ravine, it took out a mile marker post and damaged a guardrail that might have saved the next driver who lost control in that spot. I felt like the ground had shifted under me. You're saying Ruford wasn't the careful driver he presented himself as? I'm saying ghosts lie, Elias. Or maybe they don't lie exactly, but they revise their own histories, edit out the parts that make them look bad. Ruford helps drivers now because he's trying to atone for his own mistakes, but he conveniently forgets to mention that his mistakes included driving drunk and damaging safety infrastructure. The warning he gives about black ice is real, and it does save lives, but the black ice wouldn't be as dangerous if the guardrail he destroyed had been there. This information rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I'd trusted Ruford, had come to think of him almost as a friend, despite the barrier of death between us. Learning that he'd been lying by omission, that his story of being a careful driver caught by bad luck was at best incomplete, made me question everything else he'd told me. Does this mean I should stop trusting his warnings? I asked. No, Selma said firmly. His warnings are still valid, still save lives, but you should understand that ghosts have agendas just like living people do. Ruford wants redemption for his mistakes, and he's earning it by helping other drivers, but his help comes with a cost, which is that you're participating in his redemption narrative. You're helping him feel like his death meant something, like he's making up for what he did wrong. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, but you should go into it with your eyes open. The dead aren't all-knowing or all good just because they're dead. They're still people, with all the flaws and selfishness that implies. Ruford helps because it makes him feel better, not purely out of altruism. And that's fine, as long as you understand the dynamic. We talked for another hour, sharing stories and information, and by the time we parted ways, I felt like I'd found an ally in this strange battle against supernatural highway dangers. Selma gave me her number and made me promise to call if I ever needed advice or just someone to talk to who wouldn't think I was crazy. I returned the favor, adding her contact information to my phone under Selma, Real One, to distinguish her from whatever entity had impersonated her that February night. Over the next few months, Selma and I stayed in touch, comparing notes about patterns and anomalies on various highways across the western states. It turned out Highway 12 wasn't unique in its supernatural activity, just particularly concentrated. There were thin places all across Montana, Wyoming, Nevada, stretches of road where the barrier between living and dead grew permeable under the right conditions. Some had helpful ghosts like Ruford, trying to prevent accidents. Others had only malevolent entities, actively causing the kinds of deaths that had claimed them. Selma had developed her own system for identifying dangerous roads and dangerous days, using a combination of accident statistics, lunar calendars, and what she called her gut feeling, which was really just pattern recognition honed over decades of experience. She shared this system with me, and I incorporated it into my own routing decisions. Between us, we were probably avoiding more supernatural danger than we were aware of, steering clear of thin places on high-risk days without consciously realizing how much trouble we were sidestepping. But you can't avoid every danger. Eventually, the road catches up with you. It was late November, almost exactly a year after my first encounter with Ruford Pine, when my dispatcher assigned me a load that I knew immediately was trouble. It was a rush delivery from Salt Lake City to Kalispell, Montana, and the deadline meant I'd have to transit Highway 12 during one of the spike days. I tried to negotiate for a different route or a later delivery window, but the client was adamant. Their need was urgent, the pay was exceptional, and if I couldn't handle the run, they'd find another driver who could. I sat in my truck staring at the load confirmation, torn between economic necessity and self-preservation. The money from this run would cover 3 months of expenses, would let me finally get some overdue maintenance done on the truck, would give me a financial cushion I desperately needed. But it would also put me on Highway 12 on one of the most dangerous days of the cycle, when the dead walked strong, and the barrier between worlds was at its thinnest. I called Selma for advice, and her response was immediate and unequivocal. "Don't take it. I know the money's good, but it's not worth your life. There will be other loads, other opportunities. You take this run, you might not live to regret it." "What if I'm extra careful?" I asked, already knowing it was a weak argument. "What if I keep my speed down? Monitor the CB constantly. Pull over at the first sign of anything strange?" "Then you'll die carefully," Selma said bluntly. "Elias, I've seen what happens on spike days. The dead don't play fair, and they don't give you a chance to be careful. They cause blowouts. They make steering wheels lock. They put figures in the road that you swerve to avoid. Being careful won't save you. The only thing that saves you is not being there at all." But I took the load anyway. I told myself I'd be different, that my knowledge and preparation would protect me where others had fallen. I told myself that Ruford would watch out for me, that I'd earned enough goodwill with the dead to maybe get a pass. I told myself a lot of things that I knew, even as I thought them, were probably wrong. The run started on November 18th, 3 days before the spike day. I made good time through Utah and into Idaho, using every trick I knew to maximize efficiency without sacrificing safety. By the evening of November 20th, I was in Butte, Montana, positioned perfectly to make the final push to Kalispell the next morning. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with scenarios and contingencies, trying to plan for every possible supernatural danger. At 5 a.m. on November 21st, I started my pre-trip inspection in the dark parking lot of a Butte truck stop. Everything checked out perfect. Tires, brakes, lights, fluid levels, all exactly as they should be. The truck was in the best mechanical condition it had been in months, thanks to the maintenance I'd done in anticipation of this run. If something went wrong today, it wouldn't be because of equipment failure. I merged onto Highway 12 just as the sun was rising, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. The road was clear, the weather was perfect, and for the first hour, I almost let myself believe that maybe I'd been worrying over nothing. Maybe this spike day would be different. Maybe my preparations and knowledge would be enough. Then I passed mile marker 80, and my CB radio came to life with Ruford's voice, more urgent than I'd ever heard it. "Elias, what the hell are you doing here? Today of all days, you know this is a spike day. You know how dangerous it is." "I know," I said into the mic, "but I've got a delivery to make, and I'm being careful. I'm ready for whatever comes." "You can't be ready for this," Ruford said, and I could hear something like fear in his voice, which terrified me because what did a dead man have to be afraid of? "It's worse than usual today. The alignment is stronger, the boundary is thinner. They're all awake, Elias. All of us. Every ghost on this highway, we're all active at the same time, and most of them aren't friendly like me. You need to turn around right now." "I'm at mile marker 82, I said. "If I turn around now, I won't make my delivery window. I'll lose the load, probably lose the client, maybe lose my truck if I can't make the payment." "Then lose the truck," Ruford shouted, his voice distorted with static. "Lose everything if you have to, but get off this highway. I can feel them gathering, feel them watching you. They know you're the one who's been warning drivers, the one who's been disrupting the pattern. They're angry about it, and they want to make an example of you." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead despite the heater running. "What do you mean, make an example?" "They want to prove that no amount of knowledge or preparation can save you from a thin place on a spike day. They want other drivers to hear about what happens to you and despair. Stop fighting. Stop trying to avoid the dangerous times. If they break you, they break the whole resistance." "There's a resistance?" "Of course there is. You, Selma, the dozen or so other drivers who figured out the patterns and started warning people. You're disrupting the feeding cycle, making it harder for the hungry ghosts to claim new victims. They don't like that, and today they're going to do something about it." I looked in my mirrors and saw what I'd been dreading. Lights appeared behind me, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Old yellow headlights from trucks that shouldn't exist, driven by people who were long dead. They formed up in a convoy behind me, matching my speed exactly, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I tried to stop or turn around, they'd run me off the road. My only option was to keep moving forward and hope I could somehow make it through to the other side. "Ruford, they're behind me. What do I do?" "Keep driving. Don't stop for anything. I'm going to try to get help, try to rally the friendly ghosts, but I don't know if we'll be enough. There are so many of them, Elias, so many angry dead who want you to join them." The convoy behind me started to close the distance, their engines roaring with a sound that wasn't quite mechanical, wasn't quite natural. It was the sound of rage and hunger, of death given voice through metal and wheels. I pushed my accelerator down harder, coaxing more speed for my truck despite the danger of going too fast on mountain roads. Then I saw her standing at the side of the road ahead. The same figure I'd seen the day Harold Pritchard died, wearing what might have been a coat or a dress, her back to the oncoming traffic. But this time, she turned to face me as I approached, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. It wasn't human. It was something that wore the shape of humanity like a mask, something ancient and hungry and completely devoid of mercy. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, prepared to hold my course no matter what happened. If I swerved, I'd roll just like Harold had. If I stopped, the convoy behind me would crush me. My only chance was to drive straight through, to call the bluff of this thing standing in my path. The distance closed. 100 yards, 50, 25. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching me with eyes that glowed the same yellow as the headlights of the ghost trucks. At the last possible second, just when collision seemed inevitable, she smiled, and then she stepped directly into my path. I didn't swerve. I couldn't afford to. I drove straight into her, or through her, or whatever the physics of hitting a ghost with a truck might be. There was no impact, no resistance, just a sudden flash of cold that penetrated every inch of my cab and seemed to freeze my soul. For a moment, I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, couldn't feel the steering wheel in my hands or the seat beneath me. I was nowhere and everywhere, suspended in a void that existed between life and death. Then I was back, the cold receding, my vision clearing. I was still on Highway 12, still driving, still alive. But something was wrong. The convoy behind me was gone, the road was empty, and the sunlight had a strange quality to it, like I was looking at the world through old glass. "Ruford," I said into the CB. "Ruford, are you there?" Static answered me, but not the normal static of an empty channel. This static sounded like voices, hundreds or thousands of them, all speaking at once in languages I didn't understand. And underneath it all, I heard laughter. Cold, cruel laughter that made my skin crawl. I looked in my mirrors and saw my own truck behind me. Not a ghost version, not a phantom with yellow headlights, but my exact truck. Same make and model, same company logos on the door, same scratches and dings from years of use. And behind the wheel I could see myself, or something that looked like me, wearing my face, my clothes, driving with my mannerisms. I was the third truck now, the ghost following behind the living driver. The entity had taken my place in the world of the living, and I was trapped here in the space between, driving an endless highway that existed only for the dead. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, this isn't right. I'm still alive. I'm still here." But was I? I touched my face, my hands, trying to confirm my own physical existence. Everything felt real, but ghosts always thought they were real, didn't they? That's what Selma had told me, that the dead often didn't realize they were dead. The CB crackled, and I heard Selma's voice. The real Selma, I thought, though how could I be sure? "Elias, Elias, can you hear me? Something's wrong. I'm getting reports that your truck was spotted on Highway 12 this morning, but when the State Patrol tried to stop it for a random inspection, the driver took off, initiated a pursuit, ended up going off the road at mile marker 97. Elias, they're saying the driver is dead. They're saying it's you." "I'm not dead," I said into the mic, even though I could feel the truth of it starting to sink in. "Selma, I'm still here. I'm still driving." "That's what they all say," said a new voice on the CB, female and cold, the entity that had taken my place. "That's what every ghost says when they first realize what happened. You'll understand eventually. You'll accept it, and then you'll join us in the hunting, help us claim other drivers who think they can outsmart the highway." "Never," I said. "I'll never hurt another driver. I'll be like Ruford. I'll warn people. Ruford?" The entity laughed. "You still don't understand, do you? There is no Ruford Pine. There never was. That voice you heard, those warnings you trusted, that was us all along. We needed you to feel safe, to think you had an ally so that when we finally claimed you, the betrayal would be complete. The helpful ghost was just bait, and you swallowed it whole." I wanted to deny it, wanted to believe that Ruford was real and honest and everything he'd presented himself as. But Selma's words from months ago came back to me. Ghosts lie. They revise their histories, edit out the parts that make them look bad, And I'd never verified Ruford's story, never checked if a driver by that name had actually died in the way he described. Everything I told you was technically true, the voice that I'd thought was Ruford said, coming through the CB now with a different quality, less warm and concerned, more clinical and detached. There was a drunk driver who died at mile marker 92 in 1991, and there is black ice in that spot during winter. But I'm not him. I'm the highway itself, or something like it, the collective consciousness of all the dead who've been claimed by this road. We needed someone on the inside, someone the other drivers would trust, so we created Ruford Pine, gave him a sympathetic backstory, made him helpful enough to be believed. And through him, through you, we learned how the living were starting to recognize our patterns. I felt something break inside me, some fundamental trust in my own judgment and perception. If Ruford had been a lie, what else had been false? Had Selma been real, or was she another construct designed to manipulate me? Had any of my experiences been genuine, or had I been dancing to the highway's tune from the very beginning? Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why go through all that trouble? Why not just kill me the first time I drove Highway 12? Because we wanted you to spread the information. We wanted other drivers to know about the patterns, to think they could avoid us if they were careful enough. It makes their fear sharper when we catch them anyway. And you played your part perfectly, warning dozens of drivers, giving them hope, making them think they were safe. Now they'll hear about what happened to you, and that hope will turn to despair. They'll realize that no amount of knowledge can protect them from us. I drove in silence, trying to process the enormity of what I'd lost. Not just my life, though that was bad enough, but my purpose, my mission, my belief that I'd been helping people. It had all been part of the highway's plan, and I'd been too blind to see it. Elias, Selma's voice came through again, and this time I could hear the grief in it. I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to stop you from taking that load. I should have known they were planning something. Is it really you? I asked, or are you another lie? It's me, the real me. I'm alive, I'm in Wyoming, and I'm monitoring the CB because I had a bad feeling about today. I've been hearing everything, all the voices, all the revelations. And Elias, I believe you're still in there somewhere, still fighting. Don't let them make you into another hunter. Be like the Ruford you thought existed, even if he never did. Make the lie true. Could I do that? Could I take this betrayal, this horror, and transform it into something redemptive? The entity had said I'd eventually accept being dead and join the hunting. But what if I didn't accept it? What if I fought against my new nature, used my position on the other side of the barrier to actually help people instead of hurt them? It would mean an eternity on Highway 12, never moving on, never finding peace. It would mean constant struggle against the other ghosts who wanted me to embrace being a hunter. But it would also mean that the entity's plan had failed, that instead of breaking the resistance, my death had strengthened it by adding an actual ghost to the side of the living. Okay, I said to Selma, to myself, to whatever might be listening. Okay, I'll do it. I'll be Ruford Pine, the real Ruford Pine, the one who actually helps drivers without ulterior motives. They turned me into a ghost to break the resistance, but I'll use it to fight harder than ever. The laughter on the CB cut off abruptly, replaced by angry static. The highway didn't like that. The collective consciousness of the dead, or whatever it was that spoke through the ghost voices, had expected me to break and despair. My defiance was an unexpected variable. You can't fight us, the entity said. You're one against thousands. Eventually, you'll tire, you'll weaken, and we'll corrupt you just like we've corrupted everyone else. Maybe, I agreed. But until then, I'm going to save every driver I can. I'm going to warn them about the spike days, the thin places, the tricks you use to lure people off the road. And unlike the fake Ruford, I'll never lie to them. I'll never be bait for your trap. I've been dead now for almost a year, though time doesn't work the same way on this side of the barrier. I exist in all my moments at once, past and present and future bleeding together just like the fake Ruford described. I can see the accidents before they happen, can warn drivers about dangers they haven't encountered yet. And I do warn them constantly, even though it exhausts me in ways that being alive never did. Most drivers can't hear me. Their CB radios aren't tuned quite right, or they're not open enough to the possibility of supernatural communication, or they're just not paying attention. But some can hear me, and for those precious few, I make all the difference. I've saved dozens of lives so far, maybe hundreds. I've become the thing I thought Ruford Pine was, the helpful ghost who genuinely cares about keeping people safe. The other ghosts fight me constantly. They try to drown out my warnings with false information, try to imitate my voice to confuse drivers, try to wear me down through attrition and exhaustion. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes I'm too weak or too late, and another driver joins the ranks of the dead on Highway 12. Each failure cuts deep, adds to the weight I carry. But I keep fighting. Because Selma is still out there, still alive, still warning drivers and disrupting patterns. Because there's a whole network now of living truckers who know about the thin places and the spike days, who root around danger and share information. Because every life I save is proof that the highway didn't win. That my death wasn't the end of resistance but the beginning of something stronger. I've seen others like me over the past year, other ghosts who've chosen to help rather than hunt. We're a minority, vastly outnumbered by the hungry dead, but we exist. And sometimes, on the worst spike days when the boundary is thinnest and the malevolent ghosts are strongest, we band together to protect the living. We form barriers, create distractions, do whatever we can to give drivers a chance to escape. It's not much, it's never enough, but it's what we have. Selma still monitors the CB sometimes, checking in on me, making sure I haven't been corrupted or lost. Those conversations are bittersweet, hearing the voice of someone alive when I'm so thoroughly dead. But they remind me why I'm fighting, give me strength to continue when the exhaustion threatens to overwhelm me. She asked me once if I regretted taking that fatal load, if I wished I'd listened to her warnings and avoided Highway 12 that day. And honestly, I don't know how to answer. I regret dying, regret losing my chance at life and all the experiences I'll never have. But if my death strengthened the resistance, if it led to more drivers being warned and more lives being saved, then maybe it wasn't entirely in vain. The highway wanted to break me, to use me as an example of why resistance is futile. Instead, it created its own worst enemy, a ghost who knows all its tricks and is dedicated to exposing them. That has to count for something. So I continue. I warn drivers about the black ice at mile marker 92, even though that's where the fake Ruford used to operate. I tell them about the spike days and the alignment patterns. I describe the figure in the road and the false distress calls and all the other methods the dead use to claim the living. And sometimes, when I'm lucky, they listen. That's all I can ask for, really. That they listen, that they're careful, that they make it home to their families. Because the highway is still hungry, and it's still feeding on a schedule. But now it knows that every meal comes with a fight. And I'll be fighting for as long as consciousness remains, for however many centuries or millennia it takes before this cursed road finally releases its grip on the dead. Selma says she'll keep driving until she's too old to hold a steering wheel, keep warning people, keep monitoring the CB for my voice. We've become partners across the barrier between life and death, united in our mission to disrupt the pattern and save whoever we can. It's not the life I planned. It's not the life anyone would choose. But it's the afterlife I've got, and I'm going to make it mean something. Mile marker 92, Highway 12, Montana. That's where I died, and that's where I'll stay. Forever warning, forever watching, forever fighting. The highway thought it had won. It was wrong.